The slender girl burst into the hospitably open doors like a whirlwind. Having missed the greeting, the guest said to the hostess, who, in terms of the impressiveness of her figure, was in no way inferior. I dressed quickly. The screening will start in half an hour, but we still need to get there, bellowed Sandy. What are you doing? What other viewing? Where to go? The guest was almost jumping up and down with impatience. She was actively gesticulating, as if trying to give her friend the necessary acceleration, and sarcastically asked, "What viewing? Couldn't you have asked anything smarter?" "Well, not culinary dance. There is less and less time left." "Why are you so nerdy?" "You don't look too fresh today." The hostess sighed and tried to explain the reason for her fatigue, and Sandy politely refused to participate in the dinner. "To be honest, I'd rather rest at home. Something is not going to improve my grandmother's health. In the morning, my blood pressure went through the roof beyond all the indicators in my memory. Even an ambulance had to be called. Just recently, the therapist came and wrote a bunch of tests that need to be taken to the mobile laboratory tomorrow. I'll call Grandma so that I don't have to go to the clinic." "So, Sandy, let me wish you good luck and keep my fingers crossed for you." The guest twisted her head, showing that she was thinking about her interlocutor. "Why, Victoria, do you want to set me up?" I sent a video of our pair performance to the preliminary selection after I received a message that I liked the dance. I submitted an official application for participation in the dance duet section. A duet is two people. If I suddenly appear on stage alone, then maybe the jury won't look at my number. Urgently looking for a partner is also a dubious undertaking. Thread did not hold back her indignation and directly asked her friend, "Shouldn't you have asked me if I wanted to perform and fight with my opponents for unknown reasons?" Seeing that Victoria did not give in to flattery, Sandy changed her tone. "Victoria, please, 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 please. I don't ask you for anything very often. You will carry out our signature program perfectly, even if you are woken up in the middle of the night. You and I have the perfect team. I simply cannot find another such talented partner, even if I search for several years. Moreover, we have a little more than an hour before the start of the screening." Hearing the girls' voices, an elderly woman came out of the room and greeted the guest. "Sandy, good afternoon." "Hello, Irene." Victoria perked up. "Grace. Grandma, what happened? You feel bad?" The woman shook her head. "Everything's fine." "Victoria, did you hear that? The doctor said that we need to move little by little if the pressure is more or less within the normal range. I'll go to the kitchen now and put some tea on." The guest decided to influence her friend's grandmother. "How are you feeling? Maybe I should run for some medicine while Victoria gets ready." Hutchin smiles. "There is no need to run anywhere for medicine. I have everything I need. Sorry, girls, but I accidentally heard snippets of your conversation but didn't listen. So you better answer. Where do you suddenly need to take Victoria out so urgently?" Sandy's voice sounded pitiful, almost in tears. "Naughty to watch a dance competition. For me, it's practically a matter of life and death." Victoria. The woman looked carefully at Sandy, who folded her hands in a pleading gesture, turned her gaze to her granddaughter, and, looking into her eyes, asked, "No, son, perhaps it would be better for you to rest. I completely tortured you. So, girls, let's go have some tea. Surely this will not be the last competition that will be." Sandy knew very well that it was useless to argue with her friend's grandmother. The girl obediently kicked off her shoes and headed to the bathroom to wash her hands. However, whipping the fragrant foam in her palms, the girl did not stop coming up with arguments that would still help force her friend to join her at the competition. Seating decorously at her long-established place at the table in her best friend's house, Sandy again turned to her grandmother. "You see, this competition is not the most ordinary and passable. Winning it will be a chance to completely change your life. Understand that although the competition is regional, the winners will get a ticket to the capital. To be honest, I understand that at the qualifying stage, you need to shine so much in order to distinguish yourself from the crowd of talents. And then training will begin, and during it, it will be possible to polish the movement almost to ideal. The main thing for me is to pass the first round, but without help, it will be much more problematic. Moreover, I submitted an application for a duet performance. I confess I didn't consult her. It's my mistake, I admit, but I acted with the best intentions. Yes, at least you could ask my opinion on the phone. You and I are constantly in touch, and you haven't even hinted even once. feeling that her friend was not angry and was only grumbling because she was a little vulnerable with her unauthorized decision to participate in the competition. Sandy continued her persuasion. Understand, Victoria will not lose anything if she goes to this viewing for pleasure. If he doesn't get excited about the idea and doesn't want to compete anymore, then he may not continue to participate in the project. I promise that after successfully passing the qualifying round, I will not insist on anything. I'm ready to swear on anything. I just wish I could pass the selection. Please let her come with me. Look, she already looks better. A blush appeared on my cheeks after tea. Assistant Sandy knew how to persuade. Victoria trembled and, looking at her grandmother, asked, "Are you really feeling well, or are you just trying to calm me down?" The woman smiled. "I'm actually fine. Go, my soul. It's time to unwind." Sandy clapped her hands and ran up to hug her friend's grandmother. "May, thank you. You are super. The coolest grandma in the world." Elections for woman smiled. And while her granddaughter was getting ready, began asking the guest about the well-being of her family. Soon Victoria announced to her friend that she was ready, and the girls headed to the casting. They decided not to spend money on a taxi. On the way to the venue of the competition, Victoria involuntarily thought that, no matter how you look at it, it couldn't have happened any other way. After all, how could she refuse her best friend, with whom she has shared joys and problems in half for more than half of her life? The girls met at a children's sports camp. They were in different squads and hardly communicated, but after going through a funny situation, they became best friends. It was the passion for dancing that first became the reason for intense competition, and later brought them closer in terms of wealth. The girls' parents were at about the same level and could afford to pay for an expensive hobby. Victoria and Sandy trained in prestigious choreographic studios in the city, but in different areas, and went to training with sincere pleasure. During their summer vacation, both girls missed their favorite activity. So when the camp announced a talent competition, they decided to participate. Of course, each of them was preparing to perform a dance number. The camp management provided a place for training to everyone, of whom, however, there were not very many. The time when a separate one-story building with a hall and a stage was opened was limited, so inevitably the participants knew quite well what their rivals would focus. It cannot be said that Sandy trained in her choreographic studios somehow, but she jealously noted that when performing some elements she was far from Victoria. In addition, the opponent trained with complete dedication. Even outside of rehearsals, Victoria was lost in her thoughts. She walked along the paths for a long time, then stopped, wrote something down in a small notebook and moved on. No matter how hard Sandy tried, she couldn't see what Victoria was recording. The day of the competition came very quickly. There was literally no empty space in the hall. After all, to be honest, there wasn't that much entertainment in the camp. According to the draw, Victoria got to perform immediately after the magician, who opened the parade of talents. Having entered the stage, the girl brilliantly began her performance to a song well known to everyone. However, as soon as the first lines of the second verse were heard from the speakers, the music stopped and silence fell in the hall. But the girl on stage acted as if nothing had happened and continued her dance. Just as before, she managed to look into the hall in such a way that it seemed that she was looking into the soul of every viewer. Victoria's lips moved slightly. Apparently, she still hummed the song quietly, helping herself not to get lost in the dance. It was fantastically beautiful. The silence was suddenly broken by a lonely voice coming from somewhere in the back rows singing popular lines out loud. Then other spectators joined the unknown soloist. Soon, almost the entire room, including not only teenagers, but also a significant part of the staff, picked up the familiar lines. One of the contestants, standing behind the scenes with a guitar, began to play a melody on the instrument while waiting for his entrance. Having spoken, Victoria made several deep curtsies to each side of the hall, as if the crowned person's name were there, and also to the author's unexpected company behind the scenes. Smiling, she blew kisses to everyone, and at that moment there was As a result, the first prize was awarded to Victoria. The silver medal was won by a young man who played the guitar perfectly and won many hearts. An honorable third place went to Sandy. She didn't show that she was upset. I found the strength to congratulate those who beat her and thank the jury and the audience. That evening, after lights out, Sandy came to Victoria's house and called her to talk. The winner did not refuse. At Sandy's suggestion, they went to the dining room so that, according to her, nosy neighbors could not overhear them. and sat down on a bench. Her silence dragged on, and Victoria asked, "Man, well, what did you want? Speak quickly, otherwise I'll fall right off my feet from fatigue. In general, I just wanted to admire your performance. You're great, just super." She handled the unusual situation well, didn't get confused, and danced without a hitch. Victoria was pleased by the praise from a peer who knew about dancing, and she admitted it. "Actually, this merit is not entirely mine. A coach once told us that at competitions of any level, you need to be prepared for anything." She gave an example of how one day at the World Figure Skating Championships in the early 70s, one of the couples competing for the Soviet Union found itself in a terrible situation. The musical accompaniment was simply turned off during the program. However, the Soviet skaters, cutting the ice with their skates creakingly, continued to perform the elements as if nothing had happened. The secret was that, at the insistence of their coach, they practiced differently. The entire dance pattern, or I don't remember exactly what they call the sequence of elements, was subject to a strict rhythm calculated in seconds. And the lack of music in the middle of the performance was not a disaster. It was, of course, much more difficult for them than it is for me today. Can you imagine the difference in the scale of the competition? Besides, no one sang along with them. Today I had this inspiring example in my memory, and their incredible support from the audience was felt. Sandy was delighted. When I called my rival to a meeting, I initially just wanted to find out her secret. Now I decided to become her friend. Victoria accepted the offer to communicate. They exchanged what they knew, and even came up with several dance routines to perform at Parents' Day. The girls came up with a small number and received a storm of applause. Upon returning to the city, the friends continued to communicate. Sandy even moved to the studio where Victoria trained. As they grew older, slender, young, excellent dancing beauties invariably attracted attention at discos. The girls entered the Institute of Culture together and managed to finish their studies. When Victoria's happy, calm life collapsed overnight. Her parents died in the family car. As soon as they drove a little away from the parking lot at the shopping center, the car flew into the air. The doctors were powerless to do anything. The only thing that saved the girl was that she didn't feel very well that day and stayed at home and didn't go shopping with her parents. She lay on the sofa under a warm blanket and drank tea with lemon, trying to quickly overcome her illness. Seeing her grandmother in front of her, who opened the door of her dead daughter's apartment with her key, Victoria realized that something irreparable had happened. She hugged her granddaughter and whispered the news in her ear. The girl could not find a place for herself. It seemed to her that if she had gone with her parents, she would certainly have noticed something was wrong and prevented the death of her loved ones. She tried not to upset her grandmother, but sometimes tears would fall from her eyes as soon as anything reminded her of her parents. During that terrible period, Sandy became a real support for Victoria. She literally moved into the apartment where her friend Sandy moved after the tragedy and did not allow her to leave in grief. She lived there, almost forcibly took her to college, forced her to at least eat something. To the surprise of many neighbors, the perpetrator involved in the massacre of Victoria's parents was detained. Moreover, the main merit did not belong to law enforcement agencies who, as if someone had issued a directive not to be too active in the search for the criminal. The grandmother spared no expense in ensuring that not only the murderer, but also the person who ordered the massacre of her only adored daughter and son-in-law, who she, contrary to popular folklore, respected and loved, was punished. Eileen sold her jewelry and diligently protected her granddaughter from the details of the investigation and legal vicissitudes. She seriously feared for Victoria because her psychological state, even 6 months after the tragedy, was deplorable. As soon as the girl approached the house where the apartment was located, where she lived with her parents, she began to become hysterical. Victoria could not forgive herself for being alive. The girl flatly refused to return to where she was once happy. Irene didn't insist. It was not easy for her herself, but alone she would probably have simply lost her mind. Her granddaughter and punishing criminals became her anchor for maintaining her sanity, but Victoria held on partly because of her grandmother. And with the help of Sandy, she tried to continue living in a new reality. The financial situation has noticeably deteriorated, and Irene, after much deliberation, arranged a home council with her granddaughter's girl. I understand that we have a difficult conversation ahead, but I won't make important decisions without you. I know that they don't throw away apartments, but I honestly feel sorry for renting them out. I'm afraid that instead of money, we will end up with devastation. How do you think? Grandma, you're right. It's too hard for me to be there afterwards. I still can't find a normal job, and I'm already ashamed to sit on your neck. The woman hugged her granddaughter tightly, glad that she did not cry. During a short but emotionally difficult conversation, the whirlwind with the sale of my daughter's apartment began. Throughout all the tragic, difficult days, when the woman was wandering around the city trying to get justice and resolving other issues, Sandy supported her friend. She even tried to drag Victoria to all sorts of entertainment events. It was no use. However, Victoria knew that Sandy met some guy at one of the discos where she couldn't get her out. And now, having made sure that her friend was in relatively normal condition, she spent all her free time with him. Victoria felt offended that Sandy seemed to be hiding her boyfriend from her, but she understood everything after another serious conversation with her grandmother. Somehow she spoke. "My girl, I know that you very suddenly had to grow up, but that's how fate decreed it. In general, this is not what I wanted to talk about now. The fact that you start seeing each other less is inevitable. One day this was bound to happen. You can't be close to her everywhere, otherwise it's something abnormal. Don't be offended that she doesn't introduce you to her boyfriend. This is quite easily explained. That's the way the world works, is that love is always placed above friendship." And Victoria objected indignantly. "So I'm not going to take Sandy's boyfriend away." My mother smiles. "I didn't think so. Sandy probably doesn't suspect you of any bad intentions either. However, she instinctively tries to spend more time with the guy and doesn't interfere with you in her meetings so as not to scatter his attention. And are flighty people. Not all, of course, but alas, very many. So I also want you not to be offended in vain and not to be too trusting. I didn't tell you, but you have the right to know. Your parents, as it turned out, were dealt with by people whom they considered good friends. Just remember that you can only trust yourself completely, unconditionally, and completely. Must be especially careful when you love. Happiness appreciates silence. The less you brag." Victoria nodded, listening to her grandmother. Everything fell into place. The resentment against my friend evaporated like raindrops from hot asphalt. Victoria really carefully remembered all the words of her only loved one. The girl always admired her grandmother, and now she was a little ashamed that she had left her beloved relative unattended. Of course, now having almost reached the desired stop, it was stupid to turn back. All that remains is to perfectly fulfill your friend's request and return home quickly. Scraps of triumphant, sad, and instructive memories managed to flash through Victoria's head while they were on their way to the casting. Even before arriving at the place, the girl's thoughts were interrupted by Sandy's enthusiastic monologue, which was anticipating success. "Very soon we will receive our diplomas, and then, hello, new life in the capital. The prospects will be better than in our dense city." Victoria thought that she was already accustomed to the ambitions and spontaneous actions of her best friend, but Sandy managed to surprise her, and she objected to the good name of her small homeland. Something happened that had never happened in many years of friendship. Sandy was embarrassed, and in order not to respond to the statement, abruptly turned the conversation to the details of the upcoming performance. As we approached the venue of the competition, Victoria began to feel more and more apprehensive. Judging by the fact that the line to the old building, which was once a cinema, stretched like a thin snake for almost half of the long stop, two things became obvious. First, the competition looked set to be tough. Secondly, the casting was not organized in the best way. However, after the girls stood for about an hour among the same people who wanted to become famous in the field of dance, the line suddenly began to move much faster. When Sandy and Victoria finally got their moment to perform, the reason for the sudden acceleration became clear. They barely had time to perform a couple of movements when the man sitting in the center of the table with the jury shouted, "Great, just bravo, enough. Wait in the next room, we need to discuss the concept for the further development of the duet. There is water, tea, healthy sweets. Rest a little later and you will be invited for an interview." Victoria didn't care because at the insistence of her stubborn friend, she only agreed to participate at the very initial stage. But Sandy's hands were almost shaking. She was afraid to hear that the project did not need a dance duet. Victoria, feeling Sandy's excitement, quietly whispered, "It seems I have completed my mission. Now I can say that I refuse to further participate in the competition, so as not to take the place of girls who dream of getting into the project." Sandy's heart was relieved, and she entered the impromptu waiting room in a great mood, provided by the support of her best friend. Previously, when the building was as planned during construction, a cinema, there was a cafe here. So, in a fairly spacious room where there were already about 15 lucky people, Sandy and Victoria easily found a place for themselves. The situation was nervous. A pretty brown-haired middle-aged woman, who was in charge of the distribution of provisions and kept order, smiled sweetly at the contestants, poured tea and water, offered sweets and something that looked like homemade marshmallows. And Victoria refused any treats. But Sandy, having politely thanked Zlata, as it was written on her jacket, decided to enjoy sweets and tea. Taking a sip of her drink, she whispered to her friend, "Why are you ashamed? The same Zlata is here, it seems to me, for a reason." He probably looks closely and gradually observes which of the contestants has what character. Anyone who is rude to her will obviously not make it past the qualifying round. Again, look how closely she looks at everyone, especially if there are girls in a group. In dance groups, you yourself understand, like astronauts, psychological compatibility is important. So she notices which group is more promising to Victoria. But you, Sandy, you are simply an unsurpassed strategist. On this Ben smiles. It is what it is. You just can't imagine how much I want to break free from here to the capital. Parents constantly name. Don't stay out late. Eat well, otherwise it's almost transparent, she mimicked. Victoria remained silent so as not to cry. She would be glad for her mom and dad to tell her something. She missed those times when the whole family was together. Fortunately, the painful conversation for Victoria was interrupted. A friend from the choreographic studio approached the girlfriends, and they chatted a little, remembering the past. The conversation helped me forget a little about the tense situation. The number of contestants in the hall did not decrease, and new ones came to replace those who went into the room for an interview. Soon they invited an old friend of Sandy and Victoria for an interview, and the next two were called into the room. In the room, lounging on the sofa, half lying, half sitting, was a man who from the first moment made the most unpleasant impression on Victoria. Mannered and haughtily, although looking up at the girls, he slightly stretching out his vowels. "I'm the producer of this project. To be honest, I watched on the online camera how you move, and it is impressive. You have an excellent duet, such coherence, such harmony, and such plasticity. You seem to move without tension. It's obvious that it's a thrill to get away from a performance, and this is very much appreciated. Best in general, I'm ready to make you a unique offer right now. I'm hiring you at a club in the capital. At first, of course, there will be a probationary period, but all the tips are yours. Of course, you will need to learn a little. Our establishment has its own specifics, but I think girls, you are talented, capable, and can handle it easily." Victoria couldn't contain her surprise. Sandy, who already had a picture of her being applauded in a huge Capitol hall before her eyes, suddenly also thought about her friend's quite reasonable question. Anton laughed nervously and explained, focusing on the age of the contestants. "It seems like minors were not allowed to attend our casting. So where did such naivety suddenly come from? Or did you decide to put on a comedy here? You will have to dance in a club. The visitors, they're generous and excited." The producer did not name the work what it most likely actually was. But Victoria realized that she had to leave this room as quickly as possible. Taking Sandy by the arm, the girl politely said goodbye. "Sorry to take up your time, but we have to go." Contrary to fears, neither Anton nor anyone else restrained the girls. They calmly walked out of the former cinema building onto the street. The always cheerful Sandy sank, realizing that she almost got into trouble, and Victoria encouraged her. "Well, don't worry, there will still be normal castings. In the meantime, let's catch a taxi. I'm very worried about my grandmother." Sandy, who felt awkward, was inconvenient to refuse, although she planned to go on an extraordinary shopping spree to improve her mood. While the girls were riding in a taxi, Victoria asked, "Let's not scare my grandmother with the truth about this false casting. Let's just say it didn't work out. This is true in reality. She doesn't need to know the details." Of course, the friend immediately agreed. "I myself hate to think that they could deceive me so easily. I could check this company and the organizer." "Okay, now I'll be smarter. Thank you, Victoria, for coming with me." Victoria smiled at her friend, although, to be honest, she felt bad in her heart. For the sake of this exchange competition, she left her grandmother alone. And I would never forgive myself if something bad happened during this time. To the girls' great relief, everything was relatively fine with Irene. However, the woman promised her granddaughter that she would undergo a full examination in the near future. "Don't worry, I'll go through all the doctors." At the local clinic, the queue to see a cardiologist was scheduled 3 months in advance. The neurologist was on vacation. There was no endocrinologist at all. In fact, only therapists and specialists. An ophthalmologist and a gynecologist worked. Victoria smiled sadly, remembering Sandy's passage about her hometown, and mentally partly agreed with her. Yes, a millionaire, a clinic in the city center with almost no doctors. Later, at the insistence of her granddaughter, Irene went to a private paid clinic. After all, Victoria was adamant. "Let's withdraw the money left from the sale of the apartment from the account, but you will see the doctors without such a long wait." The woman could only obey, and her epic began with visiting the clinic, taking tests, and undergoing examinations. Victoria, of course, asked her grandmother about the results, but in the bustle before graduation, she simply did not have time to study what was indicated. Irene cheerfully reported to her granddaughter that all the identified deviations from the norm were simply senile changes, which aroused Victoria's indignation. "Nonsense. You are always young to me." In fact, Irene's health was not as rosy as she presented it to her granddaughter. In addition to the diagnosed diabetes mellitus, the cardiologist was concerned about the condition of her heart. The intelligent woman did not panic and checked the diagnosis in another place, and then in another clinic. But all the doctors were unanimous. The condition was dangerous, and it was necessary to prepare for surgery. She diligently followed all the recommendations, and Victoria happily noted that the feverish blush had disappeared from her grandmother's cheeks. Lapsonid for when underwent surgery, and it seemed that a new happy period of life was beginning ahead. Having received their diplomas, Victoria and Sandy decided to open their own choreographic studio, where not only children but also adults who decided to join dancing could come. The girls relied on an unusual approach. They offered visitors a mix of modern dances, and also began choreographing couples' movements to wedding compositions, using an idea from a movie they had once seen. In addition, Victoria decided that in her free time she would sew, learning from her grandmother's experience. Otherwise, promoting a studio from the very beginning is not the fastest thing. Surprisingly, needlework captivated the girl, helping her take her mind off her troubles. Moreover, Irene turned out to be a patient and knowledgeable teacher and happily shared with her granddaughter all the wisdom that she knew a great deal. Just a few months later, justifying the wildest hopes of the housewives, the studio began to enjoy success. Of course, there was still no talk of net profit, but still the idea turned out to be successful. Victoria was happy that she was doing what she loved, both at home and in the company of a friend. Most of all, the girl's soul was warmed by the thought that her grandmother no longer had to finance their small family alone. Everything was fine for almost a year, and then my grandmother suddenly passed away. The girl returned home and saw that her grandmother was lying on the sofa, as if resting. She slowly went over to cover her with a blanket because it was quite cool in the apartment, since the central heating had already been turned off and, as usual, frost had returned. As soon as the girl came closer, a cry of horror escaped, it seemed, from the very depths of her soul. It was obvious that her grandmother could no longer escape the cold. The unrest that she experienced turned out to be fatal for the woman, feeling the turmoil saying goodbye to her only relative. Victoria found her outlet in the studio, lost herself in the movements, and carefully watching the dancers, the girl drove away her pain. For Sandy, for whom everything seemed to be fine, tried not to sparkle with happy eyes so as not to irritate her friend, and came to visit her less and less. Victoria was not offended. Who wants to communicate with a sad person? She was disgusted with herself, spending a long time sorting through fabrics, of which her grandmother had accumulated quite a lot. The girl seemed to be talking with her beloved relative, and it seemed that this was the only way she could, if not forget about the mental pain, then at least reduce it. One evening, having lost track of time, the girl completely forgot about the safety rules. Hearing the doorbell ring, for some reason she immediately decided that Sandy, whom she had not even seen today, had come running in. A friend warned me that she would not be able to teach classes due to personal matters, and probably dropped in to tell me something. This was a result. Victoria, without looking through the peephole, opened the doors and retreated when she saw an unfamiliar middle-aged man on the threshold with a box of cake in his hands. The girl muttered, "You must have made a mistake," and began to close the doors. However, the man did not allow her to do this and surprised her with an unexpected revelation. Hello, Victoria. What an adult you are, and you won't even recognize it. Well, I'm not proud. I'll introduce myself. My name is Michael. I am your dear grandfather. The girl grinned unkindly, remembering what her mother told her. Much more, dear. He left his grandmother when your common daughter went to school. And as far as I know from my mother, I visited a couple of times at most. So all the best to you and goodbye. The man put his foot on the threshold so that Victoria, even if she wanted, could not slam the door in front of him, as she intended, and in a stern tone, which sent shivers down the back of the not timid girl, he said, "Granddaughter, don't get excited. Part of the apartment partially belongs to me." She most likely did not bother with this formality, the proud girl. So, dear granddaughter, excuse me, move over and let me pass. Stunned, Victoria, using all her strength, managed to throw on the door chain and shouted to the visitor, "I'll call the police now, so you know." Mayan just grinned. "Yes, call as much as you like. It's even better that you make sure that I'm telling the truth. I'll also tell you that my granddaughter is the only one who won't let me in the door. I have a signature cake from the city of my childhood. Surely the police will like it." The man removed his leg. Victoria, slamming the door, locked it and froze in doubt. Indeed, will she call the police now? And what will she say? Come, because there is a relative unknown to me at my door. But he doesn't threaten or attack. After thinking, the girl, just in case, moved away from the door and dialed her friend's number. Briefly explaining the situation to Sandy, Victoria asked, "Help me out. I think your cousin knows someone in the police. Ask if it's not too difficult, what should I do?" "Understood. Don't worry. Give me 10 minutes and wait for my call." Sandy called her excited friend back, even a little earlier than the announced date, and joyfully said, "Wait, we'll arrive soon. Me and the reinforcements. You will open the door only after I tell you." Victoria sighed with relief. "Thank you, Sandy. I owe you." The girl tiptoed to the door to understand what would happen, and soon heard quiet male voices. It was very difficult to make out who was talking about what, and Victoria was now kicking herself for insisting on good sound insulation during the renovation. However, I didn't have to suffer for long. There was a knock on the door. Victoria led a friend and her cousin, Victor, whom she knew a little, into the apartment. A grandfather and an unfamiliar man appeared from nowhere. Sandy introduced him to Victoria. "This is Denny, one of the best lawyers. He will help resolve the issue with the least amount of effort." The man bowed his head and said in a pleasant baritone voice, "Although under such unexpected circumstances, I am very pleased to meet you. If you don't mind, let's all sit down at the table." I asked the citizen to calmly state the essence of his claims and present the documents that he has. "If you don't mind, Victoria, I'll ask you to prepare receipts for paying for the apartment. It can be for the last month or any other month. It's not too important." The lawyer's voice fascinates the girl. She was even glad about her grandfather's sudden invasion because this incident led to a pleasant acquaintance. While Victoria went to another room to get the receipt, Denny managed to study the passport that the girl's grandfather gave him and handed the document to Victor. "Hey, shiners, look with your own eyes. The stamp about marriage looks strange. It seems to me, Cousin Sandy, having carefully examined the stamp, began to photograph all the pages of the passport." Michael raised his eyebrow in surprise, but before he could speak, the lawyer asked him an unexpected question. "Which store did you buy the cake from?" The man even became dignified, boastfully declaring, "You can't buy this here. In my hometown, in the only confectionery they bake according to old recipes. Yesterday before leaving, I went in and bought it." Answered Tommy True. "Bennett, it looks like you and I, Michael, are fellow countrymen. Only I haven't been to my native land, perhaps for 5 years. Who's there in the candy store?" "Still the same woman with glued eyelashes." Michael nodded. The lawyer was delighted, as if he had been told the most joyful news. "We need to go and see how he trades." "So Michael, whatever you call it, that saleswoman has been resting in the ground for 15 years now. I doubt that you are related to Victoria. Even if this were so, according to the receipts that she kindly provided for the last 6 months, you are not registered here. You have no right to this living space. And if you are thinking of filing a lawsuit, you will only be wasting your time and money. So, good advice to you. Get out of here and don't show up again. Otherwise, don't even doubt it. I will find an article under which you can be brought to administrative or even criminal liability." Nodding, the elderly man with surprising pride grabbed his document and walked towards the exit. Victoria shouted after, Take the cake. I don't need anything from you." The fraudster did not resist or refuse and almost ran away from the apartment, of which he failed to become a full-fledged tenant. Victoria was overjoyed and agreed to release her saviors only after an impromptu feast. She sincerely thanked her friend, her cousin, and the lawyer who had so masterfully saved her from her problems, and asked a direct question. "Nay, Denny, please tell me your fee." The man laughed. Sandy joined in the lawyer's laughter. Everyone made fun of the unlucky impostor. When the guests left, Victoria did not even think that the strange incident would have a pleasant continuation. However, the very next day, Denny came to her in the morning, brought coffee and cake from a rather high-status coffee shop, explaining this is as an apology for not being able to try the cake yesterday. The girl thanked the lawyer and, feeling a little awkward, suggested having breakfast together. During the conversation at the table, Victoria had the feeling that she had known Denny all her life and that he understood her perfectly. They even had the same musical tastes, which was not the case even with Sandy, who could not stand either rock or classics. Victoria was not even surprised that communicating with Denny had become a necessity for her, a real addiction. Once, during another date, the man reluctantly, as if embarrassed, shared with the girl the difficult story of his life. He said that he was married, and after a divorce, he moved from his hometown, a modest city, to the metropolis where he once studied. "That's it, until I meet you. I lived, worked, rented an apartment not far from the office, and didn't even think that I would ever love him so much." Victoria's heart melted from the tenderness of Denny, with whom she felt like behind a stone wall. A girl once invited her beloved man to move in with her, and he agreed. To confirm the seriousness of his intentions, he gave him a thin engagement ring and proposed getting married closer to summer. Now, can you imagine what a beautiful ceremony could be organized? No. Winter also has its charms, but you won't be able to have an enchanting photo shoot in nature. And I still want you to remember our wedding day forever. Now, I saw Sandy Victoria almost exclusively at work. One day, entering the tiny office, which they proudly called the trainer's room, she found her best friend in tears. "What's happened? Did you get injured? Should I call a taxi to the hospital?" Sandy shook her head. "May, I'm upset. I just don't need anyone." Van Victoria was amazed. "What are you doing? I need you. In an hour's training, everyone will be waiting for you there. Don't mope. Don't be sad." Sandy burst into tears. "Now you don't even have time to talk to me. I don't have anyone to go dance with. Just relax." Victoria tactfully did not ask where the mysterious gentleman had gone, from whom her friend's eyes shone so much, and suggested to her, "Hey, let's sit with me this evening. Denny said he would work late. He needs to go somewhere, and you and I will rest. We will set up a beauty salon at home, all kinds of masks, peelings." The girl's cheerful communication was in full swing when Denny returned to the apartment. He greeted Sandy warmly, kissed Victoria, and, after thinking, invited the girls to a cafe serving Italian cuisine. From that evening, the man also began to take an active part in ensuring that his beloved friend did not feel abandoned and lonely. On weekends, the groom took the bride and her friend to a country park, to a hotel for a picnic, or rented a house at a campsite where they could go skiing and snowboarding. Victoria was sincerely glad that her friend stopped shedding tears. In addition, things in business also went uphill. The girls even opened a branch of the studio without hesitation, entrusting all the paperwork to Denny. Victoria dreamed that soon her beloved would take her to apply. I found out in advance the work schedule of the wedding palace, all the formalities, details, and waited for this fateful day to come. The last spring month had already passed the halfway point, and I no longer talked about formalizing the relationship. Victoria would probably have walked around for some time, as they say, with rose-colored glasses and not suspect anything, but one day during a joint dinner, she had to leave the company of her fiancé and best friend to talk on the phone with the mother of one of the studio students. Girls. Returning to the table, Victoria almost caused a scandal when she saw Sandy, having moved to her rightful place, kissing Denny. The deceived bride had to call on all her self-control to help her almost calmly report, "So, Denny, as far as I understand, you are moving, so give me your set of keys. I'll collect your things and let you know when you can pick them up. Sandy, you also return the keys to my apartment." However, the friend was unembarrassed and, rummaging in her purse, said in a completely casual tone, "In general, I'm glad that everything is finally cleared up. Yes, Denny and I are together now. But let's not make a universal tragedy out of this, okay? I would like our business not to suffer because of your possible offense. Be professional. I understand that it will be difficult for you to see me, so I suggest we don't cross paths temporarily until you cool down. It's even scary. Just look, steam will come out of your ears. Sandy smiled triumphantly, putting a bunch of keys out of her bag and taking the apartment keys from the carabiner. She continued to express her thoughts. We'll divide the studios like this. The one closest to my home will be on me. You can safely conduct training in the branch. For rent, so be it. You will pay the minimum and you can take half of the profit that you make for yourself. The rest will be accumulated in accounts for future development. I think this is reasonable and fair. Victoria was surprised. Wait, Sandy, are you kidding me? Why do I suddenly have to pay rent and give away profits? I'm an owner just like you. Denny tried to calm down the girl, whom he had just not only abandoned, but also, thanks to her gullibility, deprived of a very significant part of his income. No, don't make a scandal. People are already looking at us. Kitten, understand this happens. Do not blame yourself. You are a wonderful person, a talented and beautiful girl. Everything will be all right. Let's remain friends. Pretendly. Let's build relationships in a civilized manner in new circumstances. I think you're being too dramatic. You, of course, as a coach and in dancing, have no equal. But in business, excuse me, you don't understand anything. Who, without looking, signed such papers as a general power of attorney, changes in statutory documents? The management of the business will be in Denny's and my hands. And you do what you do best. Show them how to dance. Victoria remembered that, indeed, without even reading and believing, solely only Denny's oral retelling, she signed several sheets of paper and flared up. So, having actually knocked the ground out from under my feet, taking away the joy of doing what I love, you are also trying to look like a benefactor. Oh, what great fellows. But keep in mind that I will not give up. I will study all the documentation very carefully and will not allow you to wipe your feet on me. Grabbing her purse, Victoria ran home, not looking back at the calls to stop that the traders shouted after her. In the apartment, she, running from one room to another, turning into the bathroom, into the kitchen, grabbed the Denny things she saw and threw them on the bed. Then she tied the corners of the bedspread crosswise and carried the unexpectedly heavy bundle to the door so that she could push it out the threshold as soon as her ex-fiancé arrived. Having finished clearing the apartment of Denny's belongings, Victoria rushed to study all the documents that were at home. The more the deceived girl immersed herself in reading, checking the meaning of terms on the internet if necessary, the greater her horror. Hearing how naive she was, how insanely gullible. How right the grandmother was when she said that you cannot trust anyone on condition. The girl could not imagine such a blow from Sandy, whom she considered her best friend and her groom. Even in her worst night, and the power of attorney that Victoria gave to Denny played a very bad joke. The man, taking advantage of her boundless trust, legally arranged everything in such a way that the girl, in fact, had almost no rights to the studio. She was now not a co-owner, but an ordinary hired employee, and could not even arrange a vacation or set a convenient work schedule without Sandy's approval. Victoria, of course, could have quit even now, but she decided to try to work for at least a month in order to prepare an escape route, rent a room and organize a new studio there, luring the maximum number of clients. Victoria didn't even talk to Denny, who came to pick up her things. And as soon as the bundle with his things was on the landing, she hurried to close the door. Now going to her beloved Victoria's studio was like going to hard labor. A week later, the flow of customers decreased noticeably. Even regular students began to refuse classes. Victoria blamed herself, thinking that during training there was not enough courage, and that spark that ignites talent in people who are embarrassed to dance. But one day, one of the first visitors, who became a regular, opened her eyes to what was happening. It turned out that Sandy simply blatantly lures clients into her hall, not disdaining any methods. The most harmless lie of her ex-girlfriend was the supposedly random news that Victoria was going to leave, and therefore, of course, she had no time for class. Thanking her for the valuable information, the girl said goodbye to the visitor and went to the trainer's room on weakening legs. I wanted to grab my things quickly and, once I got home, unwind to my heart's content. However, she decided first of all to write to her ex-friend that she was quitting, and she immediately fulfilled her intention. The response message that came to the messenger on her phone completely unsettled Victoria. The photo showed a vignette-style invitation to the wedding of Sandy and Denny with the mocking column +1 before the girl had time to catch her breath. Another message came. We really want you not to be angry with us and share with us the moment of our joy. The dress code is smart. Sandy and Denny. Victoria was shocked. What did she do to humiliate her like that? Why are the people she considered her support now pushing her into the abyss of despair? Was she really that deeply mistaken about them? The girl didn't know what to do, but she clearly understood that in such a state, under no circumstances could she be left alone. You need to be somewhere among people so that sinful thoughts about the most terrible way to solve problems do not enter your head. The girl went to the nearest park. There are a lot of people there, and at the same time, no one invades your personal space. If Victoria's state of mind could influence nature, the leaden gray sky would be struck by lightning. People trying to quickly hide from the bad weather would be whipped in the faces by stinging rain. Gusts of wind would tear down the tents of installed street cafes. But everything was almost exactly the opposite. The mood of one unfortunate, humiliated girl did not change anything. The sun was shining brightly in the sky. Young greenery on the trees provided a pleasant, rich shadow, and the park looked great. The unknown florist clearly did his best to create a magnificent landscape and did everything with his soul. The park was much more comfortable than Victoria remembered it, and she sat down on a bench to try to detach herself from all the worries that almost brought her to the bad edge today. She felt as if she was performing on stage and the music disappeared again. Only this time the girl had no idea what kind of dance she was performing or what kind of melody she was playing. All that was left was to freeze in confusion and desperately try to figure out what to do next. Right in front of the place where the girl settled down, there was some kind of late variety of tulips, which looked, if not winners in life, then definitely the owners of the flower beds. I wish I had their self-confidence, Victoria thought, and her thoughts were suddenly interrupted by a male voice. Why are you shedding tears? Victoria, who did not notice how she began to cry, was not going to talk to anyone and did not answer anything to the curious stranger. He left, but soon returned and sat down next to the sad girl. In each hand of the stranger there was a bowl of ice cream and a fluffy cloud of cotton candy. The man began to explain patiently in order to stop the girl, who was about to jump up and run away from him. Don't be scared, Victoria. But it so happens that I know you, although we are strangers. I work for a private investigator who, on behalf of your grandmother, worked to uncover the murder of your parents. Since we were seriously afraid that the scoundrels would use all means to influence the course of justice, my boss instructed me to keep an eye on you secretly. So we can say that you were my ward for several months. The girl looked closely at the man. Perhaps he had once flashed nearby, but she could not be sure of this. The stranger smiled and introduced himself. Me, Simon, employee of the private agency's secret. After meeting, the man handed Victoria a cone and cotton candy, explaining, in the movies they said that ice cream seems to make you more fun, but I thought maybe your throat hurts. So I took some more cotton candy. For example, I simply adore her. Victoria was in a bad mood and she answered Simon not too kindly. You can enjoy it. I try not to eat any of these types of sweets. The man smiled. Well, there is no way. True, I can't eat that much myself. Wait, now I'll treat those boys who are counting change at the kiosk, and I'll be back. Without knowing why, Victoria obeyed and waited for Simon. The assistant detective asked, You can consider this a professional interest, and if it's unpleasant for you, you don't have to answer. But I'll still ask, why are you crying on such a wonderful day in this beautiful park? Victoria grinned and decided to share her trouble. The day could perhaps be called wonderful, if not for one circumstance. Today, 2 traders took me and invited me to a wedding. My ex-fiancée is going to solemnly marry my ex-best friend. Also, the invitation is so mocked for 2 persons. They know that I have no one to go with. They're making fun of me. I just don't understand. The girl briefly told Simon the sad story of her unsuccessful love, and the man even whistled. Listen, Victoria, you may not believe it, but my instinct tells me that someone elegantly arranged your acquaintance with this Denny. You know, your grandmother was more than generous. I then received a very round sum for the work, much more than I expected. I later learned from my boss that Irene even sold some of her things to pay. You know, I was still ashamed then. Well, I was young then, I desperately needed money. In general, I didn't, as I originally wanted, to return part of my fee to your grandmother. Today I saw you, and that old feeling of shame came over me. So it seems to me, now I have to kind of return the change in the form of finding out the truth about this grandfather and your ex-fiancé. If you want, come to the agency in 2 days. I'll give you a business card with the address and phone numbers, or we can meet in any other place of your choice. This was the girl who, during a conversation with Simon, had suspicions about the too close coincidence of tastes and views with Denny, looked at the business card handed to her and replied, "Perhaps the day after tomorrow I'll go to the agency. It will be more convenient for me." Victoria walked home and thought, indeed, how strange her acquaintance with Denny had developed. The man seemed to know the unmistakable path to her heart. He even used the perfume exactly the way she likes it, with a top note of lemon and a long-lasting sillage. After all, this is not the most obvious choice at first glance for a serious, successful lawyer, as Denny seemed to be. In addition, several times Victoria noticed that he frowned contemptuously when she danced to the tune of her favorite rock band, although he claimed that he adored their work. When asked why grimaces flashed across his face, the man answered very convincingly, as Victoria seemed to be in love, about sudden colic or an attack of headache. Closely studying her memories of the recent past, the abandoned bride discovered more and more oddities. Arriving home, Victoria was already convinced that Denny, having previously learned as much information as possible about her, had done everything to gain her trust and move into her apartment as a groom. Frankly, he managed it with ease. But what was his goal? Victoria did not keep any cash in her apartment. A sewing machine, fabrics, and remnants of the family jewelry collection were all the valuables that the girl had. Out of fear, Victoria checked the hiding place. A pair of antique earrings and a ring were in place. The girl calmed down a little, but the next morning, she took the jewelry and headed to the bank and put it in the safe deposit box. Because she had no guarantees that Denny had not taken care of a duplicate key. Besides, Sandy could do it too. After visiting the bank, the girl planned to call a locksmith to change the lock just in case. Therefore, having signed an agreement to rent a locker and place jewelry there, I decided to withdraw the accumulated interest from the account so that I had cash on hand. However, an employee of a financial institution stunned Victoria with the news. "I'm sorry, but according to your power of attorney, all funds were withdrawn from the account yesterday." Trying not to scream, Victoria clarified, "Tell me, to whom did I write out the power of attorney?" You can see, the employee did not refuse the strange client and named a name that Victoria never expected to hear. It was not Denny who took the money from the account, as the girl assumed, but her ex-best friend. After thanking the operator, who sympathetically asked if everything was okay, Victoria wandered home. It suddenly became clear to her, like daylight, that it was Sandy who could so accurately orient Denny about all her likes and dislikes. It wasn't enough that her best friend didn't know about naive Victoria. It was at her suggestion and at her instigation that the man managed to appear in the image of an ideal. She believed in incredible harmony and love at first sight. Now, there was an explanation for a lot of things, and the fact that Sandy pressed on pity, cursing her loneliness, was also part of the plan. Surely, by inviting her to the wedding, the traitors also planned something insidious. Maybe someone would be involved in a raid on the apartment, while Victoria, swallowing tears, would say words of congratulations to them. After all, the friend knew for sure that she still had jewelry. She never told her where the hiding place was located in the house. Victoria did not contact the police about the theft of money, because formerly Sandy had a power of attorney, and there was no doubt that it was a completely real signature. The master replaced the lock on the door, and the girl felt a little calmer. However, she could not completely relax. I decided to use my insomnia to my advantage. Victoria began to think about an outfit to make a spectacular appearance at the wedding of people who had so vilely betrayed her trust. As soon as working hours arrived, the girl appeared at the secret agency office, following the prompts of the guard sitting near the turnstile. She found a door on which hung a sign with the name of a recent acquaintance and knocked. She came in. Before Simon told the girl the information he had obtained, she admitted, "It looks like you were right. Denny was instructed inside and out by my best friend. By the way, she withdrew money from my account by proxy, but it's my own fault. I signed all the papers that the groom gave me." The man confirmed. "Yes, I managed to talk to my cousin, Sandy Victor. He, perhaps, turned out to be the most innocent element in this scheme. In my opinion, it was used in secret. He's a big guy, and his main task was to creep up on the one who introduced himself as your grandfather." Having caught the surprise on Victoria's face, Simon explained. It was a well-thought-out production. Sandy, as I understand it, knew basic information about your relatives. Denny found an actor to play Michael. You saw your grandfather only in old photographs when he was young, and there was no need to fear exposure. The scammers wanted to get rich, and as I understand it, they almost succeeded. I think they invited me to the wedding not only to mock, but with the same selfish interest. Victoria nodded. I also came to approximately the same conclusions. I only have a few questions running through my head. Why did my best friend, who was there in the most difficult moments, suddenly decide to betray? Why did she decide to treat me this way? We never even seriously quarreled with her, Simon suggested. Maybe simple envy or greed. These are usually the main motives for most crimes. Victoria's face even stretched out a little in surprise. Initially, my family was not much richer than Sandy's was, so it's definitely not greed. As for envy, it was not she who envied me, but I who envied my friend. From the moment my parents died, I went crazy imagining that Sandy could play checkers with her dad, hug her mom, and talk to her. I was overcome with envy. What can I say? I still experience this feeling even now. Maybe she's taking revenge on me for my envy, although unlikely. In general, I don't know what to think. I'm in a lot of pain right now because of everything that's going on. I will definitely go to these traders' wedding, at least in order to, looking at Denny and Sandy, clarify why they treated me so meanly. The assistant detective explained. With Denny's motives, everything is generally clear. He was driven by greed. In his hometown, he has so many debts that you can't even shout guard. He is a rather mediocre lawyer, but his habits are such that he cannot provide for average fees. There were also harmful addictions. He disappeared from the city, having deceived several ladies out of large sums. He was supposedly going to get married. He took money under plausible pretexts and quarreled. He was treated in a private clinic in our region. He gave the doctors almost everything he had from his naive fellow countrymen for his rehabilitation. So I set out again on the path of hunting for wealth. Don't worry, we will definitely fight to get both the dance studio and the money back to you. But don't make waves just yet, otherwise Denny and Sandy might simply run away. And I want to be answered fairly. Victoria began to thank the man, and Simon sighed. I've been able to find so much information on Denny these days that it's even surprising. It seems that he is far from stupid in terms of all sorts of not entirely honest methods. A true master, but apparently overly self-confident. Do you want me to tell you right now all the machinations that he managed to pull off in our city? Or better yet, wait, and then you'll see everything at the wedding. Although Victoria had a desire to know everything at once, she, after thinking a little, answered, I guess I'll wait. I don't really want to plunge even deeper into all this dirt right now. For now, what I have learned is enough for me. There are only two problems left, what to wear and with whom to go. I'm already working on solving the first one, but I don't know what to do with the second one. Simon, maybe you can keep me company, don't think. I will pay for the support because this is a separate job. The man shook his head negatively. No, I'm not suitable for a spectacular appearance. My appearance is standard, inconspicuous, and to be completely honest, well, will you come arm in arm with me, so what? Only your ill-wishers will experience pleasure at the first moment. Just think, it seems like they couldn't persuade anyone better. Here, if you take a swing, you need to deliver a crushing blow so that their mood immediately collapses. Listen, I think I know who to choose as your companion. If it works, it will be great. Well, if not, then of course, I'll leave you the company. The output may not be the most stunning, but I will give out amazing information. Victoria agreed that in any case, they would meet half an hour before the time specified in the wedding invitation and agreed on a place. Having said goodbye, the girl went to the handicraft store to buy accessories for her planned outfit. She only had 2 weeks to create the stunning dress. The time period is not the shortest, but the idea was not too simple. Victoria was nervous and pierced her fingers with a needle several times until it bled. In order not to burst into tears from resentment and pain, the girl recalled her grandmother's words that, according to a sign, a thing sown with such incidents would definitely turn out perfect. The girl didn't have to rush to work and she missed her classes, but she was not going to bow to Sandy and ask to come back. Victoria was warmed by the idea that, quite possibly, the studio would soon be in her possession again, although her gullibility was already failing her. The girl believed that Simon would be honest with her. On Denny and Sandy's wedding day, Victoria looked truly dazzling. It looked like a spark of flame, both in color and vague associations. The top of the dress was decorated with a bold, asymmetrical neckline, and the painted skirt with high slits at the seams playfully fluttered as she walked, without revealing anything unnecessary, but perfectly exciting the imagination. Victoria herself knew that she was irresistible in this dress, but she was pleased with Simon's praise. Judging by his quite ordinary clothes, the girl realized that her companion would be someone else, and was incredibly surprised when a man who had once tried to impersonate her grandfather approached her, the detective's assistant, and to introduce himself awkwardly. Michael, unemployed provincial theater actor, but Need forced him to play the role of a fraudster on trust. Pardon me for cheating if you can. Her heart was pounding as if before an important speech, but having overcome herself, she took Michael's arm tightly and walked with him to the restaurant rented from the traders. Asked at the entrance of the girl and her companion. Sandy's parents suddenly met, who very warmly greeted their daughter's friend and looked at her companion with undisguised interest. The bride's mother cordially invited, "Oh, Victoria, I'm so glad you came. Come on in. Almost everything is already assembled there. Have fun, relax, be happy for Sandy and her fiancé. Such a great man. I hope you will be lucky one day too. You deserve it." It was not easy for Victoria to endure this conversation, and as if sensing this, her companion squeezed her hand a little more tightly. Sandy's father admired the way his daughter's friend looked, and was rewarded with a displeased look from his wife, who dragged him further. "Have you forgotten where the manager sent us? Let's go quickly and see you." When Victoria and Michael crossed the threshold of the banquet hall, the girl noted with satisfaction that Sandy and Denny froze like statues when they saw the guests enter. The bride and groom did not look happy at all now. Having somehow mastered their emotions, they waved to Victoria and her companion. Sandy reached out to the groom's ear and asked, "What is this drunk doing? You said that he would receive the money due to him and drove off to where no one could find him." "Denny, I'm scared. I'm afraid that Victoria has come up with some kind of terrible revenge." Denny hugged the bride, pulled her close, and replied, "But hardly. He's just a similar person. Victoria has a good visual memory. She may have guessed that it was no coincidence that her grandfather appeared on her doorstep, and so that I can get to her quickly and without suspicion. So she decided to annoy us. You could say demoralize, poison the joy of our happy day. I thought about it, recalled in my memory what this supposed Dimitri looked like, and hired someone. There are plenty of actors in the country dreaming of an easy way to make money. So relax, Sandy." Victoria and her companion tried to behave as if nothing had happened, and in no way stood out from the rest of the guests, either by excessive joy or even more so by gloomy expressions. Thanks to the lady manager, they almost instantly found their table and sat down decorously, waiting for the start of the holiday, which promised to be very unusual. Victoria was pleased to note how worried Sandy was looking at her, and, meeting her gaze, she smiled as sweetly as possible. She had absolutely no idea what kind of surprise Simon had prepared and was in anticipation of what was promised. At the signal from the manager, Sandy's parents brought a huge pie into the banquet hall, and the fun began in full swing. The guests congratulated the newlyweds in every possible way. The bride's parents sang a duet. The groom's aunt arranged a long presentation of small souvenirs accompanied by rhyming lines. Victoria became more and more worried, but Michael calmed her down. And when the manager announced their turn to congratulate the newlyweds, the man quietly whispered, "Victoria, our way out. Give me the right to speak and listen, and be glad that you found out about the real essence of your ex-fiancé in time." Victoria's companion, carefully supporting her, took a place in the middle of the hall. The experienced actor didn't even need a microphone. His well-trained voice, surprisingly, did not lose its sonority after many years of libations, was heard in all corners of the hall. "So, ladies and gentlemen, Madame and Monsieur, I suggest you pay attention to the screen." The manager turned off several rows of lamps, and the room became much darker. Suddenly, to the sounds of Mendelssohn's March, racy footage began to appear on the screen, showing the groom with other women. Michael accompanied the changing images with brief information about the names of the groom's beloved. Having come to his senses, Denny tried to shout down the unexpected guest and convince everyone else that the image on the screen was a photo montage, but the seed of doubt was sown. Sandy seemed completely unaware of her fiancé's loving nature, and after the photo of Denny and Victoria's company, shots of herself flashed, and then the unusual movie continued with the participation of other ladies. She slapped the groom in the face and began to shout at him, not embarrassed by those present. "You bastard. You said that we would deceive Victoria and live happily ever after. He persuaded me to help take the dance studio away from her. And then you got involved with me just for the sake of profit. How could I not have thought to follow you? I decided to have a wedding. And then what were your plans? Run away with the donated money and squeeze the business away from me too. Hate you." Finally, the display of the wrong Denny on the screen ended. The lights came on, and Simon entered the hall, accompanied by police officers, explaining, "Unfortunately, the holiday will have to end. The main heroes of the occasion are suspected of fraud." Sandy's parents rushed to law enforcement officials to explain that a mistake had occurred, but the police were adamant. Denny and Sandy were handcuffed and led to the exit. When the ex-friend caught up with Victoria, the girl asked her a question. "No. Why did you do this to me? I have always considered you a person I can trust." Sandy grimaced and blurted, "You always got everything without problems. The first places are inherited. Even the students are drawn to you, not to me." Victoria was shocked. She tried to understand sincerely, as Sandy says. Did she really almost ruin her life? Indeed, because of the start, as Simon expected. Sandy spat angrily and admitted, "You have always been ever since the sports camp, and I was like a pale image with you. Do you know what I'll tell you? I was ever since I saw her dancing. If you really want to know, then it was I who tried to ruin your performance. It was because of me that the music stopped playing during your dance. Everything turned out in your favor." Sandy did not pay attention to anyone around her and, looking into her eyes, said, "The only moments when I was truly happy. Do you know which ones?" Victoria was silent, afraid to even guess, and Sandy smiled wryly and continued, "I was ready to jump with happiness. When you were suffering, it was just as difficult to hide your joy and feign sympathy." Sandy, distraught with emotion, tried to rush at Victoria, but it was not easy to do in handcuffs. The police took the detainee further. Ling So-Ford remained standing in the middle of the hall. She had yet to come face to face with her ex-fiancé, but he passed by, barely glancing at the neckline. Victoria asked after him, "Denny, aren't you ashamed?" However, the man did not even turn around. Simeon, who approached the display case, said loudly, "Such people are never ashamed." At the request of her parents, Sandy Victoria did not make any claims regarding the money withdrawn from the account, and invested the compensation received in the amount of this amount into the development of a network of her dance studios. For her, the situation with her ex-girlfriend and fiancé became an excellent life lesson, and she was distrustful of the idea of dating that Simeon expressed. It took the private detective's assistant about 3 years for Victoria to finally believe in the sincerity of his feelings. The small assembly hall of the school was filled with students in resplendent prom dresses and fancy suits with ribbons tied. They took turns to the stage where a tall, formidable woman with a joyful smile, the principal, handed them their certificate. Next to her stood a short woman in dark glasses and a long green dress. She hugged each person who received a cherished book and cried on their shoulder. The Cynthia Wright Academic Excellence Award goes to Cynthia Wright. The headmistress said loudly into the microphone. A skinny girl in a red dress the color of her certificate, and with a long white braid, rose from the hall and made her way to the stage. She was given an award, a red certificate, and a small bunch of flowers. The girl went up to her class teacher, a woman in a long green dress. "Cynthia, darling, how happy I am for you. You have a brilliant future ahead of you. I'm sure you're clever." The woman's tears flowed again. "No, kind, purposeful. You will definitely achieve everything you want. Got it?" The girl nodded and hugged her class teacher. "Thank you for everything." Cynthia came down from the stage and sat down in the hall, continuing to watch the presentation of certificates. Suddenly, someone jumped up to her and whispered something in her ear. Cynthia opened her eyes wide and jumped up from her seat. "She has decided to leave the child in an orphanage. Do you understand?" shouted the mother to the girl. "We have to do something. Stay here." "Nah," Cynthia ordered and ran towards the house. Thankfully, it was not far away. The girl ran into the house and saw her older sister, who had already packed a bag for the baby and was holding the girl in her arms. "Betty, what are you going to do? You're not just going to leave this little girl at the orphanage, are you?" Cynthia asked. She looked hopefully at her sister, who had gathered her long dark hair into a thick braid and was wearing a tracksuit. She didn't look like herself now. Usually a bright and majestic girl who gathered crowds of guys around her, she was now unassuming. "You don't understand, Cynthia, this." The girl shook the child. It doesn't let me live normally. It drains me of my strength. It's always screaming, and I can't take it anymore. It pisses me off, makes me act like I'm not normal." Cynthia slowly approached her sister, shaking her head. "It's her, not it. Don't you realize it's a child? You can't just do this to her. You can't abandon her, you can't put her in an orphanage. Do you understand?" The girl said almost pitifully, "Then take her for yourself." Betty raised her head. "Get rid of her. Get rid of the screaming and the crying and all that. I don't want it. I don't want to hear her howl every night." Without hearing her sister's reply, Betty walked over to her and shoved the baby in, throwing her bag of belongings beside her. "No, you can't leave her." Looking into the girl's big blue eyes, Cynthia said, "What do you mean I can't? I can give her away. I don't care where, to you or the social services, it doesn't matter." The baby cried and Cynthia started to rock her, trying to calm her down. When the girl looked up from the baby, her sister was gone. Only a breeze blew in from the ajar door. 25 years later, the large wall clock struck 6. The thick hand showed the early hour when everyone who didn't have to get up early for work was asleep. But Rita was already standing by the cooker, preparing oatmeal porridge and scrambled eggs. Bruce didn't eat porridge. He liked eggs with bacon. His loving mother tried to make everything to his liking. Bruce and Frank had to get up early for work at 8 a.m., and Cynthia left for her job half an hour early, so they had to get up at 6 a.m. to make breakfast, iron their shirts, and walk the dog. Chappie was hanging around his mistress, wagging his tail merrily. Actually, Cynthia wasn't his owner. Gabrielle's daughter had got him for herself, but then married Ben, who was allergic to fur. Just like that, very smoothly, the poor animal moved into the small one-bedroom flat. With her chores done, Cynthia started to get ready for work. She was an ordinary school teacher who taught geography lessons in a small school. She had dreamed of traveling since childhood, but life had turned out so that she had only seen other countries in atlases and pictures in school textbooks. It took Cynthia a long time to get to work, and she traveled by bicycle because she did not have a car. In general, the family had 2 cars, one for Frank and one for Bruce. Cynthia helped to buy them. Frank was the first to get a used car for his 18th birthday, but soon his younger brother was jealous of him. The woman had to take out a loan to please her favorite son. Of course, they did not give their mother a lift to work. They had a hard day's work ahead of them, so they needed to sleep and rest. Cynthia would quietly cycle away in good weather, but in snow or rain they could take the bus. Cynthia had a best friend, the perky Kelly. They had met at school when Cynthia had applied for a job as a geography teacher after college. Kelly taught biology and often came to her friend's house to talk about life and discuss the latest news. This day was no exception. On arriving at school, Cynthia learned that the Year 11 classes were being taken away to prepare for the final bell, so she had no lesson. Kelly, who had given her rowdy 5th graders a test paper, quietly went next door to check the exam schedule. Kelly caught Cynthia checking her notebooks. Her girlfriend. "Do you even rest once in a while?" Cynthia lifted her big blue eyes and removed her glasses from her face. She looked at her friend with a squint and a degree of incomprehension. "I didn't have time to check on the house last night. I was up late cleaning the bathroom. Then I had to wash a stain on Frank's white shirt. He really likes it." What time did you go to bed?" Kelly raised an eyebrow lazily, anticipating the answer. She'd known Cynthia for years and was aware of all her household chores. Cynthia shrugged her shoulders, put aside her notebook, and stood from the table. "Tea, would you like some?" Kelly nodded. "About 2 o'clock, I guess, to be honest. I can't remember. Bruce was up late watching some really interesting film, and I couldn't sleep." Kelly rolled her eyes. "I still can't understand why you sleep in the same room with Bruce while Frank is alone. Aren't children supposed to be in the same room?" "They're not exactly kids," Kelly muttered. "Are they thinking of moving out of their mother's house? They're both well into their 3rd decade." Cynthia shook her head and remained silent. She thought such talk from her friend was utter nonsense. Kelly herself had married much later than Cynthia and had given birth to a daughter 15 years ago. It was certainly not her place to speculate about such things. "How's Gabrielle?" Kelly asked, pouring sugar into her mug. Cynthia shrugged her shoulders. No, she and John had a fight the other day. I don't know how things are going. I try to stay out of their lives, you know. She should be very grateful to you, Kelly said with a slight tilt of her head. Cynthia was the only one who understood her hint. You're too good a mum for her. Cynthia shrugged her shoulder uncertainly, grimacing slightly. She understood what Kelly meant, and she hated that her friend had brought up such an unpleasant topic. How's your Justin? He sent me some pictures from school recently. I'll show you. Kelly smiled and reached for her phone, which was full of pictures of her nephew from the university in the capital. Cynthia got home before her sons for the first time in a long time. Usually, she stayed up late, sitting with underperforming students or checking a mountain of notebooks. Today, she let an 8th grade boy off in honor of his birthday and left the notebooks for the next. Her daughter called and asked to meet. Gabrielle didn't see her mother often, and this was an event for Cynthia. She hurried home to make her daughter's favorite pie. Gabrielle arrived early. Cynthia had not yet had time to take the pie out of the cooker when the doorbell rang. The woman hurried to open it, trying not to trip over Chappie, who had smelled her former landlady. On the doorstep stood her tall, russet-haired daughter in a beautiful red dress. The girl smiled at her mother and threw herself around her neck, grabbing the box of chocolates more comfortably. "Mummy, I'm so happy to see you." "What, smells so good?" Cynthia smiled and called into the kitchen. "Guess. Is it my favorite cherry pie?" "Mummy, you're great." The girl said enthusiastically and rushed into the kitchen, petting the dog on the way. Cynthia rushed to get the pie out of the oven before it burned. Gabrielle began to make tea. "How are you doing?" Cynthia asked, cutting into the steaming, delicious-smelling pie. Gabrielle smiled broadly and shrugged her shoulders. "No, John and I have made up. He gave me 27 roses in honor of the number of months we'd been together, and then he took me to the rooftop restaurant. You should have seen how beautiful it was." Cynthia smiled, happy for her daughter, putting the cake on the table. She sat down on a stool. Gabrielle set out several flavored mugs of tea and sat opposite. "How are Bruce and Frank? Haven't called them in a while." Cynthia shrugged, setting the pie down for herself and her daughter. Bruce, studying. He's almost done his diploma. And Frank, I think he's got a girlfriend, but he won't tell me anything. Can you believe it? I don't even bother. He's a big boy, he's only a year and a half apart. I think he knows what he needs to do with a girl." Gabrielle laughed. Cynthia picked up on the laughter and shook her head. "You know, John and I have decided to take out a mortgage so we can have our own place. We're going to have kids soon, and it's hard to raise them in a rented flat." "So, why are you making excuses?" exclaimed the woman. "That's right. I raised you in a foreign city in a flat that didn't belong to us. So having your own flat is the right thing to do. Are you saying that to share or to get me to give you my approval?" Gabrielle set the mug down and the smile came off her lips. She looked out the window at the leg of the kitchen table and finally shifted her gaze to her mother. "Not for this. Not for that, you see. You have to make a down payment to get a mortgage. John and I don't have that kind of money right now, and I thought..." Cynthia left her cup of tea too and looked at her daughter carefully. "Do you want me to give you money?" Gabrielle shrugged her shoulders. "I know you have some. You're saving up for a holiday abroad. There's not only money for holidays, but also for a rainy day." Cynthia said slowly. The joy of her daughter's arrival had already waned, and the woman spoke with a note of sadness, foreshadowing an unpleasant conversation. "Do you want me to give you the last of my savings?" "Not exactly, Mom, but how can I explain to you that we need the money? We need a place to live. As soon as John gets his bonus, we'll give you some of it back, and then..." The woman raised her hand in front of her, asking her daughter to shut up, and pressed her lips together. She hated saying no to her daughter, hated saying no to her children, but sometimes it had to be done. "You haven't paid me back the money you took out for John's car almost a year ago. You promised me that you and the bonus would pay me back then too. And then it was the last of the holiday money too." Gabrielle rolled her eyes. "Ma'am? Are you kidding me? You're the one who's going to remember every penny of it." Cynthia grinned bitterly and shook her head. "No, I'm not remembering every penny. I'm just asking you to be a little more considerate of your mother. You didn't even come to my birthday party, forgot about my brother's graduation, and missed my grandmother's funeral. I was working." Gabrielle exclaimed. "Me too, but for some reason I always came to your holidays. And even when you and John had your first fight, and you sat crying on the seafront in the rain, I took off work and came. Don't you remember that? Gabrielle looked away and pressed her lips together just as her mother had done a few minutes ago. So you won't give me any money then? Cynthia shook her head. Gabrielle jumped up from her seat, nearly dropping her chair, and rushed to the door. Thanks for your help, Mommy, the girl said, slamming the door. Lechings, the woman lowered her head, tears flowing from her eyes. She couldn't hold back any longer. Large, salty drops fell on the white tablecloth. Sobs were heard throughout the flat. Something clenched in Cynthia's chest, causing her unbearable pain. In the evening, when Cynthia had calmed down and was minding her own business, her sons returned. Mom, Bruce called out. Are you home? Cynthia answered from the kitchen. She was preparing dinner for her sons. I asked you to iron the white shirt yesterday, and you ironed the blue one. Like a fool, I went to the open house alone in blue. The woman rolled her eyes tiredly. She probably would have tolerated it another time, but after her conversation with Gabrielle, she was on edge. The white one was hanging in the wardrobe. It wasn't that hard to get it out and iron it. It would take a couple of minutes. Was it hard for you to remember my request? The boy asked capriciously and walked into the kitchen. Cynthia turned sharply in his direction and threw the towel back on the fridge. You're almost 22 years old. You're a grown-up guy. You're dating girls and looking for a prestigious job. And you're asking your mom to iron your bloody shirt? Are you going to hide behind your mom's skirt for the rest of your life? You're just like your deadbeat dad, said the woman loudly, throwing off her apron, and she walked briskly to her room. And yes, you sleep in your brother's room now. I am a grown woman, and I want to spend my free time in peace, not listening to your conversations and watching films at 2 a.m. Earthquakes are caused by the shifting of lithospheric plates. The most seismically active zones in our country are the San Andreas Fault. The largest mountain system of the continent is the Cordilleras, where the highest point, Mount Denali, is located. There is also the largest volcano, Yellowstone caldera. It is very dangerous to live there. There is a risk of earthquake or volcanic eruption. Japan is also in a seismically active zone. Shifts of lithospheric plates also cause the formation of large mountain ranges. The higher the mountain, the earlier it formed, meaning one plate moved on top of another. Cynthia spoke slowly and measuredly, twirling her pen in her hands and occasionally looking out the window. She liked to teach lessons, but sometimes she would forget her homework on purpose and teach new material without paying attention to the fussing and talking of the students. There was a reason for that now. My mind was reeling over the past day, and Cynthia couldn't figure out who was right and who was wrong. She felt she had been too harsh with the children. After all, it wasn't Bruce's fault that she had forgotten about the white shirt. Gabrielle was just starting her adult life, and she needed her parents' support. Besides, comparing her son to his father was fundamentally wrong. Cynthia was sure that she had managed to raise her sons differently from their father, who had abandoned the family when he saw the first skirt he saw. Bruce did sleep in his brother's room. In the morning, Cynthia didn't say anything to them, and, offended, went to work to check the notebooks left over from the previous day. It seemed so wrong, but a voice inside, still offended by her daughter's words, argued that Cynthia had done the right thing. The woman's musings were interrupted by the creak of the door, which slowly opened and a short, blonde-haired boy entered the study. He dropped his backpack beside his desk and sat down, grinning at the teacher. Cynthia, surprised at his insolence, stood up from her desk, towering over the 8th graders, and someone started laughing. All thoughts of home and problems with the children immediately popped into Cynthia's head. She looked at the boy, at his smirk and cheeky face, and immediately remembered her children. Remembered Gabrielle's face when she heard her mother wouldn't give her money, Bruce's face when he'd wondered not to eyeball the shirts. And the woman snapped. Henderson stood up quickly from the table. Or else what? Brazenly grinned the boy. Otherwise your parents will be called to the school, and you'll be out of here immediately, Cynthia said sternly. She glared at the student with anger. His every movement, every sound and smirk made her hate him. What's wrong with you? Do you even know who my father is to say such a thing? You're a bloody mama's boy, Henderson. Cynthia continued, you will leave my office immediately. Or what? You're gonna drool on the baby. You're a loser like every other teacher in this school. You work for pennies, you're unhappy with your life, you hate children, and you've been out of a man for a long time, Mrs. Cynthia. Cynthia opened her mouth and gasped with indignation. Her hands clenched into fists. She looked at the boy and saw only evil in the flesh. The woman grabbed the schoolboy's backpack with one hand, his ear with the other, and hurried to the door. She almost threw the boy into the corridor, followed by his briefcase, which hit the concrete floor and all its contents fell out. "Get out, you little rascal," she shouted. "Shove your arrogance down your throat. And don't you dare come into this office again. You nasty, brainless boy." Cynthia slammed the door angrily, just in time to see the shocked teachers standing in the corridor. The woman shifted her gaze to the children and saw the frightened looks on their faces. They looked at her with fear, huddled into their desks. Cynthia sighed and returned to her seat, the students tucked into their books. After everything that had happened, Cynthia pondered the boy's words. He had a point. The teachers at the school worked for little pay, tolerated the insolent remarks of students like him, and were not happy with their lives. Every day, Cynthia observed herself to Kelly and the other colleagues. They were all terribly tired, with lots of problems at home and at school. Some who succumbed to life's difficulties were feared by the children. Some who chose the tactic of defiance were loved by the children. The second option belonged to those teachers who happily went home, letting children go home a few lessons early, not conducting tests and talking to them on extraneous topics. Oh yeah, those kids loved them. True, then in colleges and universities screamed about not knowing English or physics. The reason was the teachers who chose their peace, but those who tried to give children knowledge were not loved, and Cynthia was one of those who tried to combine the two tactics. She meekly tolerated the attacks of students like that blonde-haired boy. Going along when kids asked to be let off early on Friday or the last day of the quarter, while still trying to teach lessons and provide knowledge, the woman never thought the day would come when her kindness would only lead to trouble. There were not many students like Henderson, but those few who took advantage of her teacher's kindness and in time became insolent. The school disliked the teachers most of all because of them and turned into nasty and strict, not compromising and wanting only to leave the hated job as soon as possible. Henderson, however, was special. His father, a local MP, had a lot of power and gave his son to a rich lyceum where such children brought everything on a platter. However, after another scandal involving the son of the mayor of a neighboring region, the deputy had to send the boy to an ordinary school to save his place. Of course, at first it was difficult for him, but soon he realized that he could trump his father's influence and actively used it. The teachers got away with it, the children were shunned, and everything was relatively peaceful until Cynthia became indignant. She was in a bad mood. On a normal day, she would probably have guffawed or gently reprimanded the boy for being late, so as not to cause trouble. But under the pressure of her own problems, she did the opposite. After class, when Cynthia was about to go home, the school radio called her to the principal's office. Those teachers who were still in the school saw the woman off down the corridor with pity. One even patted her on the shoulder. The scandal quickly spread throughout the school, and everyone from the principal to the first graders knew what had happened. Cynthia slowly walked up to the large door with the principal's sign and wanted to knock, but immediately a man came out of the office, talking on the phone. The woman immediately recognized him. His face was on half the posters in the city before the next election. She wanted to say something, but the man was gone. "Mr. Kelvin." Cynthia knocked on the open door and stepped inside. The director, a short, gray-haired old man with a bald spot on his head, sat in a high office chair, rubbing his forehead with a wrinkled hand. He raised his head at the teacher who entered and put on his half-glasses, looking at her carefully. "Mrs. Cynthia, hello." Mr. Kelvin said hello and pointed to a chair in front of the desk. Cynthia nodded and sat down. "Is this about Henderson?" Mr. Kelvin nodded. "I'm sorry, Cynthia." "Cynthia, I remember you as a girl when you came in after college with a baby in your arms. I remember everything you did for the school. But you realize we don't want any conflicts with the deputy, don't you? How did you even get that boy thrown out of your office by force? That's not like you." Cynthia lowered her head low and sighed. "I'm sorry, Mr. Kelvin. It's just I'm having problems at home and a bad day." And he said that sort of thing, me. Cynthia sighed, trying to hold back tears. Mr. Kelvin held out a glass of water and shook his head. He folded his wrinkled hands on the table, squeezing their lock with force. "I'd love to keep this thing quiet, Cynthia, but you have to realize that the school doesn't want any trouble with his father. We'd lose our funding and we'd be inundated with inspections. All the teachers will be sent in for performance reviews. It's easier for me to leave the school." Cynthia concluded quietly, taking a drink of water. Resentment and despair squeezed her throat, cutting off her oxygen supply. The woman was almost out of breath. The school was part of her life. She had worked there for over 20 years. The office, the children, the lessons. The notebooks all seemed so familiar it couldn't be otherwise. And now that part was being taken away from her, leaving her soul torn to shreds. I'll let you resign on your own. I'll try to keep it quiet so the details don't get out, but you know it's hard to hide. Everyone will talk, and the kids will bring other stories to their parents. If you ever want to work in a school, it won't be in our town. A pall shot over Cynthia's eyes and memories of days gone by flashed before her. She could clearly see the day she had to leave her hometown so that she and Gabriel could have a normal life. History was repeating itself. The town where she had raised 3 children, found friends, a job and colleagues, must be left. It was as if fate mocked her every time life seemed to fall into place. With the black gel pen left over from exams, Cynthia wrote her resignation letter of her own volition. A sprawling teacher's signature flaunted on the white sheet, letting the woman know that this was the end of normal life, the end of everything she had. "Can I take my things back?" the woman asked quietly. Mr. Kelvin nodded. "Of course, Cynthia. You can come and say goodbye to your children, to your colleagues. Maybe when the kid graduates, you'll be able to come back." "Thank you, Mr. Kelvin," Cynthia nodded. "I'm grateful for your kindness, for everything you've done for." When Cynthia came to work at the school, Mr. Kelvin was the head teacher and physics teacher. He took kindly to the young girl, who was not even 20 when she came to work before she had finished her studies. He helped her get on the waiting list for housing for a young family. He had let Gabrielle go when she was sick, was okay with maternity leave, and had helped the young girl in many ways. Cynthia was grateful to him for that. With a stone on her soul, Cynthia went into the study to pick up her things and a few books. Following her in was Kelly, who, only seeing her friend's hard stare, shook her head. She knew at once what had happened. "Did the principal give you time to pack your things and say goodbye?" "Eh? He's wrong. It's not your fault what happened." That's what we all wanted to do to that underachiever. "Kelly, I threw him out into the corridor. He fell on the concrete floor. Thank God he didn't hurt himself. Not only would I have been sued, but I wouldn't have been able to forgive myself." Cynthia exhaled and sat back in her seat, covering her face with her hands. "The fact that they let me resign is lucky. You should be fired with a reprimand in your personnel file. Not given a free pass." Kelly walked over to her friend and hugged her lightly from behind. She rested her head on her shoulder and remained silent. "The house is a mess. I had a fight with Gabrielle and Bruce. She asked me for money for the mortgage and I said no. That's what it's all about. You know, if I'd given her the money, it would have been fine. I had to buy a pole. No, it wouldn't have been fine." Kelly said sharply, "They're grown-ups and they're on your back. You wouldn't be able to stand it if not now, then later, and you need to start your life without them. They're your children. I understand that, but you can't give them all of yourself. You've already done too much for them, especially for..." Cynthia shook her head, staring at the desk. She saw notebooks, textbooks, pens, and a newspaper. The woman grabbed it and flicked to the page with the ad. "Now, look," Cynthia jabbed her finger at the small ad on the last page. "There's a cabin for sale, cheap in the neighborhood. It's almost next to where my grandmother lived. She died a long time ago, but I remember being there. It's very beautiful. So buy it. I know you've got the money, and you can almost go back to your family. It's near your hometown, isn't it?" Cynthia nodded. "You can start a new life away from the children of deputies who don't know how to raise sons." Cynthia nodded. "Do you think it would be worth it? The peace of mind." Yes. Kelly's husband, William, helped Cynthia move things into her new home. The woman packed everything up while her sons were away. She left them a little note and left, determined to start a new life. It seemed so strange. At 40-plus years old, starting a new life, Kelly didn't understand her friends' worries, constantly cheering her up. The cottage was not far from Cynthia's hometown, a 40-minute bus ride away, and she could be at the cemetery where Cynthia's mother and father were buried. It was lovely, although the cottage did seem a little dilapidated. William had told them that it could be rebuilt, the roof patched, the kitchen floor redone. The gas was there, the walls were strong, even the furniture. The man shifted his gaze to the chair that had broken after Kelly had sat on it, face almost intact. "How are you doing on the money?" Cynthia shrugged her shoulders. "I've spent most of it on the house, of course, and I haven't added to the piggy bank in a while. But it's enough for the first time. Maybe I can even pay for roof repairs." "Do you think it's expensive?" William scratched the back of his head and looked at the roof. "If you hire a crew, yes, you can find handymen in the village. They'll do it cheaper, but the main thing is not to hire alcoholics. They will drink more than work. And grin. Oh no. Okay, well, thank you guys. You've been a big help. Kelly waved goodbye to her friend and got into the car. She had to get to the rehearsal for the last bell. Her 9th grade class was graduating. Cynthia stepped out of the house and took a closer look around. It was small, 4 rooms, a bedroom, kitchen, bathroom, and hall. There was also a small porch, but it was a summer porch, and it was hard to count that as a separate room. Cynthia considered herself very lucky to have bought the house for such a small amount of money. When she asked the seller why it was so cheap, he said the village was dying out and the school might be closed soon. No one was going to buy a house there, and he had inherited it by chance from a great aunt who had died, so he didn't value it much. There was a lot of work to do to improve the house, but the woman was ready for it. She was finally alone. Cynthia spent more than 3 days cleaning the old house. On the 4th, she left the most difficult part, the attic. Admittedly, she was afraid to go up there. It didn't look secure, so she climbed up there very carefully. Plus, it was dirtier than all the other rooms. No one had clearly been in there in about 20 years. At my lights, and the woman set up the stepladder and slowly climbed up to the trapdoor in the ceiling. She almost fell in, but when she got to the top, she realized there was more work than she thought. In the attic were many boxes and old chests where women had stored their belongings. Cynthia decided to start sorting through the boxes to throw away anything she didn't need. Rolling up her sleeves, she sighed and sat down on the dusty floor. The first 3 boxes were women's things. The 4th contained children's toys. Cynthia took them apart at first, winding up dolls and wiping dusty cars, but then gave up the futile endeavor and left the box. Another one contained albums of photographs. Cynthia flipped through them, marveling at the happiness of the people in the pictures, and set them aside. The farthest box was small and light. Cynthia opened it and aghast. On the very top was a wooden frame that held a picture of her sister and a strange guy. They were hugging and looking happily into the camera lens. Cynthia wrapped her shaking hands around the photograph. Betty. The girl looked exactly as Cynthia remembered her. Long, thick black hair, dark eyes, sharp facial features, and a narrow nose. The woman hadn't seen her sister in over 25 years. She was sure she was dead. Seeing a picture of Betty happy seemed very strange and brought bitterness to her soul. Cynthia pulled out the frame and saw a small wooden box with the letter B carved on it. The woman opened it and saw a small pendant box in the shape of a scarab beetle. Betty's pendant. Underneath, it was another picture. This one had just a guy in uniform. The year was written on the other side. The woman gasped in surprise, the year of the girl's birth. The man smiled. A letter lay next to it. Cynthia unfolded it and smiled, starting to read the lines. Smegya Betty. I am writing to you, hoping to get a reply. You haven't answered in so long that I was afraid for you. What if something has happened to you? Grandma should be visiting soon. I hope you'll be with her. I missed your hair the color of night and your piercing eyes that looked straight into my soul. I can't live without the touch of your velvet skin. A day without you is agony, and I haven't seen you in 5 months. I miss our moonlit lunches and long late-night conversations. I hope all is well with you. Your loving Cynthia sighed sadly. This seemed to be the baby's father. There were others under that envelope. With each letter, Jerry grew more and more desperate. He wrote that he missed her and couldn't be without Betty. In the last letter, he wrote that his grandmother had told him everything. She was not too long ago and told me that you had gone to your house and never came back. I have no idea what happened. You probably found someone else, richer or prettier, I don't know. I hope you're happy. In case you're wondering, I've decided to stay in the army on a contract. You probably won't read this. I don't know your new address, so I'm writing to my grandmother's address. Jerry. Jerry seemed to really love Betty, but she wasn't looking for love. She was looking for something else. Cynthia went downstairs. She didn't want to read any more letters. It bored her. She felt sorry for Jerry. He had written such beautiful lines to Betty, and Betty was herself all the years as the older sister. She had acted as if she were a couple of years younger than Cynthia. Back then, the still young girl had to sort out her problems and hide their consequences from her ailing father. If anything happened to Betty, everyone ran to Cynthia, and she dealt with all the problems. Broken windows, missing money from her father's stash, late returns, and more. Betty never thought about the feelings of others. Jerry was no exception. Cynthia cooked potatoes and cucumbers she'd bought from her neighbor's grandmother on the old, greasy cooker and sat down to dinner. The food wouldn't go down her throat, however. She looked at the seemingly appetizing potatoes and could not swallow a bite. Everything seemed bland and tasteless. The reason for this was thoughts of her sister. The woman had not seen her sister for over 25 years. She didn't even know if Betty was alive, and now her conscience was beginning to torment her. Betty was a sister, no matter what, so she couldn't just abandon her. "We have to find her," Cynthia said firmly and took a bite of cucumber. A clear plan formed in Cynthia's mind. She saw no obstacle to finding her sister. The letters had stirred her soul. The next morning, Cynthia went upstairs, going through the boxes looking for something that might help find Betty. There was nothing in the letters. However, at the deepest depths lay an old notebook with many numbers and addresses in it. The numbers were probably invalid. It had been so long, but the addresses could be verified. Cynthia could safely say that the book belonged to her sister. Betty's crooked handwriting she could recognize from 1000. She had sprawling letters and long curves. At the very end of the book was the girl's name, Donna Smith. Next to the name it said, "Call for help." Betty had a habit of signing everything she could so she wouldn't forget. She always carried a notebook with her and wrote in it the names of suitors and the places and times she met them so she wouldn't get them mixed up. Cynthia had laughed off this habit, but now realized it wasn't such a bad thing. Cynthia tore out the sheet and stuffed it in her pocket. Sure, it had been a while, but maybe this Donna could help. The woman finished all the chores at home, asked her neighbors for the best bus ride to the address that was in the book, and scheduled a meeting. She left early the next day. Cynthia was glad to be back in her hometown, to walk through places familiar from her childhood, and to remember the past. The woman walked past the school and smiled. She saw the windows of her class. She remembered her graduation. She was prophesied to have a successful future. Cynthia knew the university she would enter. She had been preparing for the exams for a long time, and then what happened happened. The house that was in the notebook was on the very outskirts of the city. It was the neighborhood where the poorest lived. In Cynthia's class, only 2 people were from that neighborhood. They walked around in bad clothes and often with bruises. Both of them left after 9th grade and moved into the dormitory. Cynthia hoped their lives were better than they had been in high school. The basement where Donna's flat was supposed to be was empty with no door. Cynthia slowly stepped inside, looking around cautiously. "First, we'll put it up soon." A man smoking on a bench said in a hoarse voice. He smelled foul, probably of booze and cheap cigarettes. Cynthia smiled with a nod and walked inside before the man said anything else. In the entryway, the smell was the same as the man's. True, there was the added scent of urine as well. The woman sighed and headed for the 3rd floor. There, she surmised, was the room she was looking for. There was no lift, of course. Flat number 11 was on the 3rd floor. It had a large metal door with obscene writing scratched on it. The bell was pushed through the wall. Cynthia pressed it and gently removed her hand. There was no telling if it worked or not. A moment later, Cynthia heard heavy footsteps outside the door. Someone was walking towards the door and grumbling under their breath. "Who has come in there?" the woman asked and opened the door. The woman was tall, full, with thin hair pulled back with a scratched hairpin, wearing a drab dressing gown and a grease stain on her chest. Cynthia smiled. "Hello, Donna Smith. Depends what for." The woman stretched out, looking around. "You see, I'm looking for my sister. Her name is Betty. She wrote your address in her notebook." The woman made an incomprehensible rumbling sound and laughed. "Betty, I haven't heard from her in years. I owed her a favor, so I helped her about 30 years ago, maybe less." "When was the last time you saw her?" Donna shrugged. "I'm telling you 30 years ago, no 25. The neighbor's boy was born then. His mom was screaming when she went into labor that day. We just celebrated his 25th birthday. What did she want? Where did she go? She came running and all hell broke loose. She asked me to help her find a place to live. But I gave her the number of a friend who rented a room in a communal flat in the region. She took it and ran away. Can you give me the address?" Donna grinned and held out her hand. "We don't give out information for free." Cynthia rolled her eyes but reached into her purse. Pulling out a 3-note note, she handed it to the woman and tilted her head. Donna went back into the house, tore a small scrap off the wall calendar, and wrote an address on it in scrawled handwriting. "There you go, Snow White. But there's nothing for you there." Shrugged her shoulders. "No. Why not?" "I heard she got married, so I don't think she's been this dump in years." Cynthia had been told that phrase too often lately. So she grimaced, snatched the paper with the address out of the woman's hand, and walked away. "Name." "Thank you," Cynthia mumbled politely. After being in that entrance, she wanted to wash up, so she went home. She had time to go to the address. The next day, Cynthia went to the school to ask about the vacancy. She had no intention of going home. Of course, the kids called her, but she didn't answer. That's what Kelly had said. Her opinion was one the woman usually listened to. Of course, it was heavy on her heart that she hadn't answered her sons. However, for the first time in a long time, the woman felt free. The school was small, 2 stories high, windows open everywhere. May was hot, and children with watering cans were running around outside. Next to them was a short woman with white hair and a long skirt. She was giving directions and periodically approached the girls who were planting flowers. "No, Cooper, haven't you ever planted flowers before? What is this? You should have covered it all the way with..." Cynthia chuckled softly and walked over to the woman. Excuse me, could you tell me where the principal's office is?" "Or good afternoon." The teacher smiled. "Are you someone's mom?" "Oh, no." Cynthia shook her head. "My children are grown up. I moved to your village recently and I need a job. I thought you might have something here. Are you a geographer by training?" "Oh, we've got a vacancy for a geographer, but you might find something, Mrs. Camille. Ground floor, 3rd office, go in and walk straight ahead. Her door's on the left. Don't miss it." Cynthia nodded gratefully and went into the school. The headmistress' door was indeed where the woman had said. Cynthia knocked. A thud was heard. "Come in, mate." "Hello, my name is Cynthia. I'm a geography teacher. I just moved here and I need a job." Mrs. Camila nodded hello and smiled broadly. "My name is Mrs. Camila. I'm the principal. Have a seat, tea, coffee." Cynthia shook her head and sat down. "The geographer's seat is unfortunately taken. But we have a vacant place for a teacher of technology, drawing, and Russian. Russian you will hardly agree to teach." Cynthia nodded. "I think there's a technology class there, don't they?" That was Mrs. Brooke. She's a biologist. She's working 2 jobs. She's not doing anymore. She teaches everyone's biology too. Classroom management. She's also the head teacher. It's a lot of work. Then I could take the place of the technology teacher." Cynthia smiled. "Would you mind?" Mrs. Camila shook her head. "There's no point in signing you up now. Let's start with a new school year, but you probably need a job right now, don't you?" "That would be nice." Cynthia grinned, remembering how much money she had left in her account. "We're short a teacher at the day camp in July." "Agreed." Cynthia nodded. Mrs. Camila brightened up and took a blank sheet of paper out of her desk and wrote something on it. "You will collect the list of documents, pass the commission, and you can come and I will register you. You're just in time, you should know, Cynthia. They're going to close our school, you see. Not enough students, not enough teachers. No, they don't. And new people are coming to the village." Cynthia smiled. "Yes, it's very beautiful here." "Yes. If it's no secret, where did you move to?" "The 15th house on Okyabrskaya Street," Rita replied. "Mrs. Anna's house, we remember her. She had no children of her own, but she always had a house full of children. Her nephews used to come. She'd invite the village children and give them all a treat. She was a kind woman. Rest in peace." "Do you remember if she had a girl living here?" "About 25 years ago, tall, black hair, big eyes, and..." "Betty. I remember her. She was Jerry's fiancée, Mrs. Ann's nephew. She was a strange girl. I never liked her. I was a bit older myself then. She was like, I don't know. What's your point?" "Inside time, the photos in the attic." Cynthia shrugged her shoulders and got up from her chair. "Thanks for your help, Mrs. Camila. I'll go and collect the papers." Cynthia, cheerful, walked out of school and headed home. She has a home, she almost has a job, and maybe soon she will find her sister. Suddenly something prickled inside, as if warning her, but the woman paid no attention. She only smiled at the sight of children running around the schoolyard. The house at the address Donna had given was the same as her own, except there was a door in the entrance. On a bench sat the exact same man as the one outside Donna's house. He was smoking a cigarette and looking mockingly at Cynthia. The woman shivered and headed inside. The flat was on the 5th floor. Cynthia climbed the stairs, the soles of her new trainers sticking to them, and saw a door with 4 bells next to it. The woman was confused and rang the first one, and a few seconds later someone opened the door. "I'm not buying anything," an old woman's voice squeaked out. "I'm not selling. My name is Cynthia. I'm looking for Betty Wright." Doesn't she live here? Betty, what do you want her for? The old woman asked suspiciously. I'm her sister. She doesn't have any sisters. I lived here before her. She never had any sisters. Why don't you call her? Cynthia asked irritably. Aunt Emily, how long are you going to hug the door? Came a loud female voice. And this is for you. The old woman said snidely and ducked back in, slamming the door shut. Cynthia stared shocked at the closed door. A few seconds later, it swung open again. Who's there, Cynthia? A woman with short black hair, dark brown eyes, and plump pink lips appeared on the doorstep. The woman stood in a silk dressing gown and shocked, staring in front of her. Betty. Cynthia couldn't bear to look at her sister. For the first time in ages, she realized she had done wrong. She shouldn't have let Betty go. She should have stopped and helped her. Then things would have been different. Grace, come in. Are you all right? Cynthia followed Betty into the old-smelling flat. The woman took her sister into a small, cozily furnished room with light wallpaper and a small bed. Sit down. Do you want tea? Without waiting for an answer, Betty poured tea from behind the teapot into a cup and retreated to the kitchen. Cynthia began to look at her sister's room. Light floral wallpaper, transparent tulle on the windows, a small dressing table with a shaped mirror and a pile of jars in front of it, a small, evenly made bed with a teddy bear on it. There were lilacs on the window and a fluffy rug on the floor. The room looked well kept and not, to be honest, it wasn't how Cynthia had imagined rooms in a communal apartment. Betty returned a minute later with 2 cups of delicious-smelling tea. 1 cup she set in front of her sister, the other she took for herself. I won't offer you anything sweet for my figure, Betty said, running her hand over her waist and grinning. Cynthia smiled. So how did you end up here? By chance, I bought a house and found pictures of you in the attic, so I thought I'd look you up. Your friend, Donna, told me where to find you. Donna Pampuchetti, huh? I haven't heard from her in 100 years. Well, good of you to come. How are you doing, married, I suppose? Cynthia shrugged her shoulder vaguely. I went out, yes, I came back in quickly. He left me for a mistress. When my eldest son was 10, son. How many children do you have? Betty asked interestedly. Me, 3. Cynthia smiled. 2 boys and a girl. They're grown up, living on their own. Betty clapped her hands with joy and said she had never doubted her sister. I married a rich man. I thought I was doing well, but he soon swapped me for a young girl. At least he left me some money. I had a chance to buy this room back. I lived here, renting from a neighbor, and then I got married. I thought I'd never come back. But then life turned round. Cynthia, listen, I hate to ask, but how is Anessa? Cynthia frowned. She didn't know what she was talking about. My daughter, she must have been brought up by her mom or by you. You gave her away? Yes, she's not. No, she's fine. We didn't give her away. Cynthia had a bad feeling and didn't want to tell her sister about her daughter's upbringing. She didn't understand why she had such thoughts in her head, but she didn't want to. All right, well, how are Mom and Dad doing? Cynthia looked away and pressed her lips together. Dad got worse after you left and left us soon after, and Mom died 4 years ago of a heart attack. I'll give you the address of the cemetery. It's not that far. Cynthia sighed. I don't understand how in all these years you've never met Mom. I moved to the next town over. Betty shrugged her shoulders. She seemed so friendly that Cynthia couldn't believe she was her sister. Of course, it had been so many years, and she was even glad if Betty had her head on straight. But it was strange talking to her after everything that had happened between them. Betty, I found pictures of you and Jerry in the attic. There were letters too, and I'm sorry, but I read them and I don't understand why it happened between you and Jerry. Why did you leave him? The woman lowered her head and covered her face with her hands. She looked like she was going to cry. She was breathing hard. I was a fool then, Cynthia. You know, a fool. He loved me for real and I fell for the money. When I got pregnant with Anessa, I thought it was the end of everything. He was going to be in the army. I'd have to follow him and the baby around. I didn't want that. I dreamed of a rich life of happiness and freedom, and here was a child. I didn't have time to get rid of it. I had to give birth. And then I fell in love with him. Rich, handsome, tall. He promised to take me with him. So I decided to give Anessa away. What can I say? I was a fool. There wasn't a day I didn't regret it. Do you think she'll forgive me? Cynthia listened to her sister with bated breath, and then she opened her eyes wide and was silent for a few seconds. No, she has a family, and she doesn't know that her mother is not her own. The frightened Cynthia said, It's better not to spoil the girl's life, not to make her quarrel with her mother. She has a good life, and Betty sides. Now, I understand, Cynthia. Thank you for telling me. At least I don't have to worry about my daughter now. My spirits are in place. I wish I could find Jerry. I've been thinking about him lately, too. He's in his 5th decade. My health's failing. I live in a shithole. I work in a shop. So I've been having these thoughts. I don't even know what to think about. I've been thinking about you and Mom and Dad and Anessa and Jerry. He must have been very upset when tears came to her eyes and she stopped talking. I'm sorry, Cynthia. I came to see my sister and she's complaining about her life. You'd say nothing's changed in years. Cynthia shook her head and walked over to Betty, wrapping her arms around her. It's all right, Betty. I've found you now. I live near here. You can come round. It's okay. Betty hugged her sister and sobbed even more. One more thing, I can help you find Jerry. I bought a house from a relative of his, so in theory, Betty pulled away from her sister and looked at her with eyes shining with hope. Really? Cynthia, you're not joking? No, of course I'm not joking about it, but are you sure you want to? What if he's already married and has a family? Betty waved her hand. I just want to apologize to him for everything. And you too, Cynthia. Thank you. You're the best. Betty's long, thin arms picked Cynthia up and squeezed her so tightly that she could hardly breathe. Cynthia returned home, happy to see her sister. She was shocked by Betty's changes and felt bitter that she had lied to her. After all, Betty had simply made a foolish mistake in her youth. She shouldn't have to pay for it all her life. It seemed very wrong. However, she could not explain the reason why Cynthia had not spoken of Gabrielle. It was instinctive. After dinner, Cynthia pulled her phone out of her bag and saw several missed calls from the children. The woman pressed her lips together and sighed. She missed them, constantly thinking about how Bruce and Frank were doing without her. How was Gabrielle doing? Cynthia resolutely dialed her second son's number. Hello, Mum. Bruce asked loudly into the receiver. Frank, come here. Mum's on the phone, Mum. Why aren't you saying anything? Is everything all right? Cynthia sobbed. Oh, Bruce, everything is fine, my golden one. Are you all right in there? I'm fine, Mum. Cynthia heard the voice of her eldest son. Where did you disappear to? Neither we nor Gabrielle said anything. She told us about what happened between you two. She was wrong. And Kelly told us about the job. We're sorry. Is that why you left? The woman shook her head and then answered out loud, remembering that the boys couldn't see her. No, it wasn't because of that. Are you guys living well there? Is Gabrielle okay? Yes, Mom, it's fine. Come back. We miss you. Me too, boys, but I can't yet. Sorry. The woman whispered and dropped the call. It became even heavier on her heart. She had never been separated from her children. After calming down, Cynthia dialed the number of the guy she bought the house from. She hoped the guy knew Jerry's address or phone number. He did know, but only the place of employment. Said he hardly ever talked to him, so that was all he could give. Cynthia agreed on the place of work. It wasn't too bad, though. The next morning, Cynthia went to the children's sports complex where Jerry worked. At least that's what his relative had said. It was a large building. Cynthia approached the security guard and asked how to find Jerry. Thanks. What's the last name? Cynthia shrugged her shoulders. Very slight D18 principal aerations. Arding up live 5 Jerry's per floor here. The woman smiled awkwardly, then aghast and reached into her bag. Yeah, here's a picture of him. See if you recognize him. Cynthia handed the guard the photo. The man took it and hummed. That one I know, don't I? Mr. Jerry is a karate instructor. He has a class on the 3rd floor now, room 25. Can you find it? Cynthia nodded and set off to find him. She arrived just as the class ended, and the classroom was empty. There was only one man, tall, dark-haired, and with a large scar on his face. Are you Jerry? The man nodded. Do you want to put your child in the section? Cynthia shook her head. My name is Cynthia. I'm Betty Wright's sister. Jerry frowned. I don't want to remember anything about her. She's a terrible woman. She's changed. No, Cynthia shrieked. She's different now. She asked me to find you to apologize. She's very sorry for what she's done. You see, she's all alone. I don't care. The man said harshly, she deserved it. After all, she should have been alone. Jerry turned and walked away, leaving Cynthia alone. The woman rushed after him. But please, Jerry, please, she's unhappy and she just wants to apologize. I'm begging you. Jerry stopped, his back tense. He turned round sharply. Betty will never ask for forgiveness. She only loves herself and thinks only of herself. Cynthia frustratedly shook her head. Okay, Cynthia, just for your sake, okay? so you can see who your sister really is." Flexions of the woman brightened up and threw herself around Jerry's neck. "None, thank you." Cynthia shivered. "When's a good time for you?" "Mate, let's do it tomorrow at 5 p.m. Cynthia gave Jerry her number, and the next day he picked her up to go to Betty's house together. They pulled up to the house and the man whistled. "Or does she really live here?" "So she should." "Jerry, I'm sorry, but you can't say that about my sister," Cynthia asked. "She's really unhappy." The man grinned and opened the entryway door. They went inside and up to the door. Cynthia rang the doorbell, but it didn't open. Strange, maybe she couldn't hear it. Cynthia pressed the next button. The door opened, and an old woman's head with a long nose poked through the crack. "Mate, what do you want again?" the old woman asked. "Do you call Betty?" "I'd call Betty, but I can't. She's gone away." "Not where?" Cynthia frowned. "To her daughters, I think. She said she had a daughter now." "No," Cynthia shrieked and looked at Jerry in a daze. "Are you sure it was to her daughters, or did she say something?" "She took the bus out yesterday morning. She came back in the evening, and today she put her things in a bag and took off. She said not to look for her, said she was starting a new life." "What did she leave in?" "Ding," Cynthia asked, confused. The old woman shook her head and shut the door. The woman stepped back. "What a fool I am. She's a bitch," she realized. "What happened?" Jerry asked and picked up the weakened woman. "Me. Let's go to the car." Jerry put Cynthia in the seat, gave her a bottle of water, and opened the window. So what happened?" "I don't understand." "No, 25 years ago, Betty wanted to give her daughter, her newly born daughter, to an orphanage because she was going to leave with a man in another city." Cynthia sighed heavily. "Me. I took the girl for myself and raised her. I recently moved into your grandmother's house and decided to find Betty. I did. She asked about her daughter. I didn't tell her that I raised the girl myself. I lied, but she must have guessed. Somehow got the address and went to see her. So what? The girl understands that her own mother abandoned her." Cynthia shook her head. "She doesn't know I didn't tell her. I didn't think would ever turn up." "No, so call her, tell her." The woman shook her head. "How am I going to explain to her over the phone that I've been lying for 25 years? What am I going to say? That her mother is a liar or—" Cynthia's phone vibrated. She picked it up and ahead, starting to cry. Jerry snatched the phone and read the message. "Aunt Cynthia, how could you lie to me for so many years? I'll never forgive you for that." The man shook his head and held out a handkerchief to the woman. 25 years ago. "Is this my daughter?" Cynthia nodded and sobbed again. "She doesn't want to see me. How am I supposed to live?" The woman asked through her sobs and looked at her phone. Grabbing it, she dialed her son's number. "Bruce, there." "What? Is she at your place?" "What did she say to Gabrielle?" No, tell Gabrielle it's not true. She's lying. She's Gabrielle. Listen, daughter, don't believe her." As she put the phone down, Cynthia cried even harder. "Betty told her that I took Gabrielle away from her, that I did it on purpose to leave her without her daughter." Gabrielle took the phone away from Bruce and the sobs got louder and told me to never come into her life again. "Great. What am I supposed to do now?" Cynthia asked Jerry to drive her home to see her daughter. The man kindly agreed, wanting to get to know her. "Did Betty hurt you badly?" Cynthia asked after half an hour of traveling. She couldn't stay silent any longer. She needed a distraction. Jerry grinned. "At the time, I thought I loved her more than life, but it turned out I didn't. She left, and the war took over me." "Did you get this there?" Cynthia asked, showing us our temple. Jerry nodded. "You have more children, don't you?" The woman nodded. "Yours?" "Yeah, mine, Bruce and Frank. At least they answer the phone. They say Gabrielle takes Betty's word over mine. Bruce tried to prove it to her, but all she did was go home." "I'm sorry," Jerry said, turning the wheel. "And let's switch to you. I'm not used to you with my peers." Cynthia agreed, rubbing the phone in her hands. Soon Cynthia and Jerry arrived at Gabrielle's house, but she didn't even open the door. Betty relayed her words and slammed the door in her sister's face without even noticing Jerry. "Now, she doesn't even remember me." The man grinned, but immediately stopped talking when he saw Cynthia sliding down the cold wall. No, she wasn't crying. She just couldn't feel anything. Betty had taken a part of her life. "Let me take you home," Jerry said, sitting down next to the woman. Cynthia returned home alone. She kept dialing her daughter, but she didn't pick up and then blocked her mother's number. Bruce and Frank gave some details, but Betty shunned them, afraid they would lure her sister to their side. A few days later, Jerry arrived. He pulled up beside a leaning fence got out of the car and clucked loud. "You look like you could use a man. The fence is all fallen down. I see the roof's thin till the first rain." Cynthia stepped out onto the porch and put a hand to her head to keep the sun out of her eyes. "What are you doing here?" "I'm on holiday, so I thought I'd spend it at my childhood home, especially since it belongs to a friend of mine." "Are you going to invite me, or do you have to pay for the entrance?" The woman grinned, waved her hand in the direction of the house, and went to prepare dinner. Jerry did stay at Cynthia's house. He ordered material for the fence and even fixed the roof. All morning he climbed on it, tapping and drilling. After lunch he climbed down, clapped his hands together and said, "Take the job, mistress, not for ages, of course, but for a couple of months will do." "Nay, thank you, let's go inside. I bought some homemade cave uses from my neighbor. Would you like some?" "Sure." The man smiled broadly, stretching the scar into a crescent shape. Every day Jerry did something new in the house. Then he ate Cynthia's lunches and praised them. It was mandatory. The woman noticed that the uninvited neighbor was very good-looking. He was tall, trim, strong. Jerry was nothing like Cynthia's ex-husband. All he did was lie on the couch after a hard day's work. Every weekend he went to the bar with his friends, and even the day Frank had a fever of 40 degrees was no exception. Cynthia called an ambulance, and during the examination, her husband came back into the house barely standing on his feet. He yelled at the doctor and then went to sleep in the middle of the living room. Cynthia was terribly embarrassed at the time, and the doctor advised her to leave such a husband. Cynthia's new neighbor was a different kind of sensitive and intelligent. He kept up conversations about books and various places. "I've been to Prague. A colleague of mine had gone there. I was visiting him." Rita only smiled dreamily at the stories about different places. "I've always wanted to travel, but first there was Gabriele, then Frank, and then Bruce. Besides, a teacher's salary doesn't really allow for traveling." "Why a teacher?" Jerry asked and leaned back in his chair. He and Cynthia were sitting across from each other in the living room. After a hard day's work, they were planting potatoes. Of course, it was late, the end of May. But a neighbor had given them a few buckets and said that if Cynthia was going to stay in the village, she had better plant a vegetable garden. Jerry, as usual, was not left out. "I wasn't going to go to teacher training school, but Gabriel came along, and I blew the entrance exams and went to another town so as not to hear the neighbors' ridicule. So I went to the Pedagogical Institute, and then I went to the correspondence department, barely graduated, and went to work. That's the whole secret. Of course, I like to be with children, but it's hard. I got kicked out for throwing a student out into the corridor by force." There was a whistling sound in the room. Jerry shook his head in surprise. "Me, you." "I don't believe it. That was wrong." Cynthia shook her head. "And besides, he was the son of a deputy. I also framed the school I worked at. Either you have a demon inside you, or that bastard was so bad at geography." The woman sadly remembered that day. Geography had nothing to do with it. He was just cocky and overconfident, and I was too friendly. But, whatever is done for the best, isn't it? I found a sister. And what did I end up with? No daughter. Yeah, it's definitely for the best. There was silence, broken only by the sound of a mosquito flying around the room. Evan couldn't find anything to say, so he just remained silent. Jerry and Cynthia grew closer. They sat and talked more and more often. In the evenings he talked about the war in the army, she about the children in school. Sometimes they went to help the old lady next door, who rarely had children over. First they cleaned her house. Then they helped in the vegetable garden, and Jerry also mended her fence. The old lady was very grateful and gave the helpers a can of milk and a packet of cakes. One day in late June, Jerry, realizing that Cynthia would be returning in the dark, set off after her. He met her in the middle of the road. "Now, why are you here?" "It's dark. I thought you were scared." "Today is the 22nd, Cynthia said, as if it meant something. "It's the day of the shortest night of the year. Before you get home, it will be light." "Isn't it? But I'm scared to be home alone." Cynthia laughed. She knew she liked Jerry, and she knew he liked her, but she didn't know what the outcome of their affection would be. The blue night sky was covered in a scattering of millions of stars, and at the very top was a bright, full-body moon that lit up the walkway so brightly that it seemed as if it was daytime outside. "When you showed up at my compound and started talking about your sister, I thought you were just like her." Jerry suddenly started talking, hypocritical, bitchy, and cruel. "But then I saw how upset you were about losing your daughter, and I realized you weren't." "You're the kind of woman I'd always like to have by my side," Jerry admitted. Cynthia stopped breathing for a second, then took a deep breath, hesitating to look at Jerry. I haven't had a wife or even a relationship for longer than a couple of months after Betty. She took away any faith I had in women, in people, but you were able to bring it back. Your jokes, your concern for the kids, your love of work, it all made me see that there was good in this world. Why do you say that? Cynthia asked. You and I are adults. I think it only takes a couple of days at our realized age to know if someone is your person or not. Cynthia finally shifted her gaze to the man. He was looking straight at her, his eyes shining with hope and something else, some feeling unknown to Cynthia. You're very good, really. 100 times better than my ex-husband or any man I've ever had in my life. But I'm 40+ years old, with 3 kids, a bunch of problems, and a bitchy sister. Do you really need that? The man grinned and pulled Cynthia to him. I'm not 15 either, Cynthia, and I know what I need. A tiny flame of hope lit in the woman's heart, and she smiled shyly. Cynthia was walking home from camp late that night. Everything had to be prepared before the inspection. It was almost dark outside, and she was enjoying the cool night air and the moonlight. Then she saw someone walking towards her. Jerry, Cynthia smiled. A man was walking towards her with a small bouquet of flowers in his hands. Cynthia smiled, embarrassed. Is that for me? It's for the most beautiful woman in this village. Jerry tilted his head. Cynthia laughed. Oh yes, clever, very clever. Thank you. Jerry smiled back, and putting up his elbow, Cynthia put her arm around him for a walk. Only if it's all the way home, I have no strength at all. Can you imagine? We've cleaned everything we can. I don't think a cleaning lady cleans this much in a year. We also clean everything we can before the inspection. One time they made us wash the jump ropes. Can you believe it? Cynthia laughed. We took a test before camp that asked how to disinfect baby nipples, and the camp was 7 years old. How silly is that? Jerry shrugged. The phone rang. Cynthia pulled the phone out of her pocket and gasped. It's Gabrielle. The woman whispered and took a step backwards out of weakness. Jerry picked her up, afraid she would fall. With a trembling hand, Cynthia pressed answer. Hello, Gabriel? Yes, I am. And who are you? Where's my daughter? What? How long? Let me talk to her, please, Gabrielle. Cynthia put the phone down and looked at Jerry in confusion. Her eyes were filled with fear, pain, and confusion. She's been kidnapped. They told me to pay $1.05 million in cash, and they said they'd send me the address. We should go to the police. Jerry said, pulling himself together. Cynthia shook her head and sobbed. They said if I go to the police, they won't spare her. Jerry sighed, taking the woman under his arms, and led her home. Gathering their things, they headed into town. By morning, they were at Cynthia's house. She opened the door with her key and was greeted by Bruce and Frank. The boys hugged their mother and looked at her worriedly. Mom, we can't get Gabrielle on the phone, and neither can John. It's been 2 days. May. What are you all worried about? Shrieked a cheerful voice from the kitchen. Elation, a woman in a red leather jacket, came out into the corridor. A girl wants to go for a walk, and you're already shouting. She's not going to live with that bloke for the rest of her life. Cynthia stared at her sister and threw herself right at her, grabbing her dark hair and pulling it. It's you. It's all you. You're the reason she stopped talking to me. You're the reason she was taken away. It's all you. Cynthia screamed. Sons and Jerry barely pulled Cynthia away from Betty. Jerry wrapped his arms around the woman and held her close, whispering soothing words in her ear. Cynthia began to go limp. You're crazy. Betty shrieked, standing up. Bruce and Frank looked at each other. Hey, Mom, are you saying she's been kidnapped? She already said that, Jerry said a little harshly. We got a ransom call. No. What makes you think it's my fault? Because there's no one else, Jerry said again. You're the only one out here messing with dangerous people. Betty tilted her head and looked into the man's face. No. Jerry, you? What are you doing here? Jerry clenched his jaw, remained silent. Guys, get her out of here, or I won't vouch for myself. Frank nodded at the door. Betty's eyes went wide. The boy took her gently under the arm and led her to the door. Go to your son-in-law's house, Betty. You'll be better off there. Nobody wants you here. We've only put up with you because of Gabrielle. Betty adjusted her bag on her shoulder and hummed, her chin high. With a quick stride, she was out of sight. A few minutes later, Bruce and Frank, Jerry and Cynthia were sitting at the table in the kitchen. Bruce was making tea while the others were talking quietly. In the middle of the table was a telephone. Suddenly it rang. Cynthia grabbed it and pressed the answer button. Yes. The money? We don't have the full amount. Give us time. Okay, we'll find it all. Gabrielle is alive. Let me talk to her. Daughter, are you all right there? No. Dropped. Bruce concluded and put the tea on the table. Mum, calm down. Did you hear Gabrielle's voice? Cynthia nodded. She was so frightened, I can't. Where can we get so much money? We could sell the cars. Frank shrugged his shoulders. No, Jerry said sharply. I've already called my friends in the army. We'll do it all. The woman jumped up from her seat and grabbed Jerry's hands. No, you'll ruin my daughter. She's my daughter too. The man objected. You haven't brought her up for years. Cynthia shouted. Don't you dare. We'll find the money and give the ransom. Sell the cars. She ordered her sons. The boys nodded. Are you sure it's all there? Cynthia asked, her trembling hands gripping the bundle. She was breathing heavily and looked around every now and then. Frank nodded. I'll make it look easy, please. I'm carrying money to ransom my daughter. Do you really think I can be calm? I can't be calm a priori. The boy shook his head. No, good luck, Mom. Cynthia nodded and walked forward. She had to save her daughter, even if she had to give up all her money, her life to do it. She was ready. The criminals had called and told her to bring the money to a safe deposit box at the airport, where to pick up Gabrielle. They would tell her later. Cynthia walked uncertainly through the airport, trying to find the safe deposit boxes. She walked to the right number and slowly opened it. Putting the money inside, she slammed the metal door shut and headed away. She didn't look around or back, walking quickly and purposefully towards the airport exit. The phone vibrated and Cynthia jumped in surprise. She picked up the phone. There was a message on it with an address. It was a few blocks from the airport. The woman rushed to the car where her son was sitting. He was in Jerry's car while he waited at home. No, Frank, let's go. I'll show you the way. The guy started the car and they got moving. In only a few minutes they were there. It was an old, abandoned factory where only bums lived and boys climbed in sometimes. Cynthia jumped out of the car and rushed inside. Frank hurried after her. They searched the ground floor and then the second, then the third, and even the basement. Frank ran round almost the entire building. Cynthia screamed so hoarse she was hoarse, but the girl wasn't there. The woman turned towards her son and began to slowly slide down the cold wall. Now, Gabrielle, we lost her, Frank. We lost our Gabrielle. Frank, what am I going to do? The boy looked around confused. He shouted once more, picking up his mother. He led her to the car. While they were looking for the girl, the sun went down and it became completely dark. Frank dialed Jerry's number. Uncle Jerry, it's empty. What's going on? What? We're on our way. They found her, Frank smiled.